Welcome to the Romance Fiction Club, where different romance authors come together to share their romance works. If you think our library is missing a romance genre you love, please let us know in the comments. We will do our best to make that content available. Please subscribe to the channel so we can keep creating free audiobooks for you to enjoy. Thank you so much for being with us, and have a wonderful listening.
This content is adapted in order to comply with YouTube guidelines. If you wish to access hundreds of romance novels filled with steamy scenes, join the club through the link available in the description. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel, and thank you.
Rook, a dark motorcycle club romance. Written by Andy Wayne, a USA Today bestselling author. Chapter 1. Ellie Finch inhaled deeply, savoring the pungent aroma of street vendor pretzels mingling with car exhaust. The cacophony of honking horns and rapid-fire conversations enveloped her as she stood on the crowded sidewalk, her fingers wrapped tightly around her voice recorder. Her hazel eyes darted from face to face, seeking the perfect subject to kickstart her urban tribe's exposé. A rhythmic clacking sound caught her attention. Ellie's gaze landed on a nearby skate park, where a group of teenagers executed gravity-defying tricks on their boards. Perfect, she thought, her heart quickening with anticipation. As she approached the chain-link fence surrounding the park, Ellie's mind raced. How to make that crucial first impression? She'd learned early in her career that the right introduction could make or break an interview. "Excuse me," she called out, mustering her most disarming smile. "I'm Ellie Finch, a journalist working on a piece about urban subcultures. Would any of you be interested in sharing your experiences?" The skaters exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and wariness. Ellie's stomach tightened. She'd faced rejection before, but each time still stung. "Come on," she silently urged. "Give me a chance." "What kind of experiences?" A lanky boy with a mop of curly hair asked, his board tucked under one arm. Ellie's smile widened. An opening. "I'm fascinated by the sense of community within different urban tribes," she explained, her voice taking on the warm, engaging tone she reserved for interviews. "Skater culture has always intrigued me. The skill, the camaraderie, the way you transform urban spaces into your own playgrounds." She watched as interest flickered in their eyes, replacing the initial skepticism. This was the part Ellie lived for. That moment when walls began to crumble and stories emerged. "You really want to know about us?" A girl with vibrant blue hair asked, her tone a mixture of surprise and pride. Ellie nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. Your perspective is invaluable. Would you mind if I recorded our conversation?" As the skaters nodded their assent, Ellie felt a familiar thrill course through her veins. This was why she'd become a journalist, to give voice to the unheard, to weave together the disparate threads of human experience into a tapestry of understanding. She raised her recorder, her finger poised over the button. "Let's start with something simple," Ellie said, her voice soft but clear. "What does skateboarding mean to you?" The curly-haired boy, who introduced himself as Zach, leaned against a nearby railing, his eyes lighting up. "It's freedom, you know. When I'm on my board, nothing else matters. It's just me, the concrete, and the rush of landing a trick I've been working on for weeks." Ellie nodded, jotting down notes as she listened. The passion in Zach's voice was palpable, and she found herself drawn into his world. "And what about the community aspect?" she probed, her journalistic instincts kicking in. "Oh man, that's the best part," Zach grinned, gesturing to his friends. "These guys? They're my family. We push each other, celebrate victories, pick each other up after nasty falls. It's not just about the sport, it's about belonging." As Ellie absorbed their stories, her gaze drifted to a nearby wall. A vibrant mural stretched across its surface, a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes that seemed to pulse with life. Her breath caught in her throat. It was stunning. "That's incredible," she murmured almost to herself. Turning back to the skaters, she asked, "Do you know anything about the artist?" The blue-haired girl, Sarah, nodded towards a figure hunched over a sketch pad near the mural. "That's Raven. She's always working on something new." Ellie's heart quickened. 2 subcultures in one afternoon? This was gold. Would you mind if I... She gestured towards the artist. Go for it, Zach smiled. Thanks for listening to us ramble. As Ellie approached the mural, what drove someone to create such beauty in public spaces? What messages lay hidden in those swirling colors? She took a deep breath, steeling herself for another encounter, another story waiting to be told. The strains of a melancholy guitar riff floated on the breeze, catching Ellie's attention. Her interview with the graffiti artist had yielded rich material, but the haunting melody tugged at her curiosity. She found herself following the sound, her footsteps echoing off brick walls as she ventured deeper into a narrow alley. The music grew louder, and Ellie's heart quickened with anticipation. Rounding a corner, she stumbled upon a scene that took her breath away. 3 musicians huddled in a semicircle, their instruments weaving together in a tapestry of sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air. Ellie hung back, not wanting to disturb the magic unfolding before her. The lead guitarist, a woman with wild dark curls, swayed with eyes closed, lost in the music. A lanky man with tattooed arms coaxed soulful notes from a battered saxophone, while a third member kept time on a makeshift drum set of buckets and pans. God, I wish I had my camera, Ellie thought, fumbling for her phone to at least capture an audio snippet. As she hit record, the guitarist's eyes snapped open, locking onto Ellie with startling intensity. The music faltered for a moment, then surged on with renewed vigor. Ellie felt pinned in place by that gaze, her journalistic detachment crumbling in the face of raw emotion pouring through the music. Just as she was gathering courage to approach, her phone buzzed insistently. Ellie groaned, recognizing Maris's ringtone. She answered reluctantly. Hey, Mar. Can I call you back? I'm in the middle of... Ellie. Maris's voice crackled with static and worry. Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm fine, I promise, Ellie soothed, stepping away from the musicians with an apologetic wave. Just doing some field research. You wouldn't believe the stories I've uncovered today. That's great, but... Maris hesitated. Look, I know you're onto something big with this motorclub story, but I'm worried. These guys have a reputation, Elle. Are you sure you know what you're getting into? Ellie sighed, torn between irritation at the interruption and appreciation for her friend's concern. I'm being careful, I swear, but this could be my big break, Maris. I can feel it. Just promise me you'll watch your back, okay? Maris pleaded. And check in more often? I don't want to be that overprotective friend, but you're not, Ellie assured her, glancing back at the alley where the music had faded to a soft, melancholic tune. I appreciate you looking out for me. How about we grab coffee tomorrow and I'll fill you in on everything? As they finalized plans, Ellie felt a pang of guilt. She hadn't told Maris about her growing fascination with the Shadow Ravens. Some instinct warned her to keep that close to the vest, at least for now. Ellie pushed through the heavy oak doors of the city library, the musty scent of aged paper enveloping her. Her footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as she made her way to the archives section, determination etched on her face. Time to dig deeper, she murmured, settling at a microfilm reader. Hours slipped by as Ellie immersed herself in newspaper clippings, her hazel eyes scanning decades of headlines. The Shadow Raven's name appeared sporadically, often linked to rumors of illegal activities. But something didn't add up. There has to be more to their story, Ellie thought, rubbing her tired eyes. As she scrolled through a more recent article, a headline caught her attention. Local motorclub raises thousands for Children's Hospital. Ellie leaned closer. Well, Shadow Ravens. What's this about? She quickly jotted down notes. This could be the angle she needed, a glimpse into the club's hidden depths. Pulling out her phone, Ellie hesitated. Should I really pursue this? She wondered. The potential risks flashed through her mind, Maris's worried voice echoing in her ears. But the thrill of uncovering the truth, of potentially redefining public perception of the Shadow Ravens, was too enticing to ignore. With a deep breath, Ellie dialed the number listed for the charity event organizer. Hello? A gruff voice answered. Ellie's professional demeanor kicked in. Hi, I'm Ellie Finch, a journalist working on a feature about local community involvement. I was hoping to discuss the Shadow Ravens' participation in your recent fundraiser. There was a pause, and Ellie's heart sank. But then, well, now, that's not a call I was expecting. What exactly did you want to know? A smile spread across Ellie's face. Everything you can tell me, she replied, her pen poised over her notebook. This was it, her first real lead into the enigmatic world of the Shadow Ravens. As Ellie listened intently, the event organizer, a man named Frank, painted a picture she never expected. His gravelly voice softened as he recounted tale after tale of the Shadow Ravens' community involvement. You wouldn't believe it, Frank said, chuckling. These tough guys on their bikes, they showed up at the children's ward dressed as superheroes. The kids went wild. Ellie's pen flew across the page, her eyes widening. That's incredible, she murmured, her preconceptions about the club slowly crumbling. Frank continued. And it's not just one-off events. They've got a mentorship program for at-risk youth, a food drive every Thanksgiving. Hell, they even helped rebuild old Mrs. Johnson's porch after that storm last year. As Frank spoke, Ellie felt a familiar tingle of excitement. This was the kind of story she lived for. Complex, surprising, human. Why do you think they do all this? Ellie asked, genuinely curious. There was a pause on the line. I reckon, Frank said slowly, they've seen some rough times themselves. Maybe this is their way of making sure others don't have to. Ellie nodded, even though Frank couldn't see her. The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture far more nuanced than she'd anticipated. As the sun began to set, Ellie found herself in a cozy corner of a local coffee shop, nursing a latte and poring over her notes. The rich aroma of coffee filled the air, mingling with the soft chatter of other patrons. She tapped her pen against her notebook, her mind racing. How do I piece this all together? She mused, taking a sip of her drink. The warmth spread through her, mirroring the glow of satisfaction she felt at her progress. Ellie began jotting down ideas for her feature series, her handwriting becoming increasingly messy as her excitement grew. Shadow Ravens, Beyond the Leather, she wrote, then crossed it out. No, too cliché, she muttered. As she brainstormed, Ellie couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and trepidation. She was on the cusp of something big, she could feel it. But with that came risks. Risks that made her pulse quicken and her palms sweat. One step at a time, Ellie, she whispered to herself, closing her notebook. You've got this. Ellie's fingers hovered over her phone for a moment before she dialed Maris's number. The familiar ringtone echoed in her ear as she gazed out the coffee shop window, watching the city's evening bustle. Ellie! Maris's vibrant voice crackled through the speaker. Tell me everything. A smile tugged at Ellie's lips. Maris, you won't believe what I've discovered about the Shadow Ravens, she began, her words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. They're not just some rough-and-tumble biker gang. They've got layers, Mar. Real, meaningful layers. Layers? Like an onion or a parfait? Maris quipped, her tone playful but tinged with curiosity. Ellie chuckled, shaking her head. More like a community pillar in leather jackets. They've been organizing charity events, supporting local businesses. There's so much more to their story than what meets the eye. As Ellie recounted her findings, she could practically hear the gears turning in Maris's head. Sounds intriguing, Elle, but are you sure you're not getting in over your head? Ellie's enthusiasm faltered for a moment. What do you mean? I mean, these are still bikers we're talking about, Maris said, her voice softening. Even if they do good deeds, there could be risks involved in digging deeper. Ellie's gaze drifted to her notebook, filled with scribbled observations and questions. I know, Mar, but this could be the story that really puts me on the map. I can't back down now. Just be careful, okay? Maris's concern was palpable. What's your next move? Ellie straightened in her seat, determination flooding through her. I need to get closer, maybe attend one of their events. See them in action, you know? And if they're not keen on a journalist poking around? Then I'll have to get creative, Ellie replied, her mind already formulating plans. Don't worry, I'll be careful. As they wrapped up their call, Ellie felt a familiar mix of excitement and nerves coursing through her veins. She hung up, her phone suddenly feeling heavier in her hand. The coffee shop had grown quieter, the warm glow of the lamps casting long shadows. Ellie gazed out at the darkening street, her reflection staring back at her from the window. "This is it," she murmured to herself, gathering her things. The real story begins now. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Ellie took a deep breath. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with potential dangers and revelations. But she was Ellie Finch, determined journalist and truth seeker. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them head-on. Chapter 2. The clubhouse walls seemed to vibrate with the intensity of Rook's voice as he paced the worn wooden floor, his heavy boots echoing with each step. Dax stood like a granite statue, arms crossed over his broad chest, his piercing gaze fixed on his leader and friend. "Those Iron Viper bastards are pushing too far, Dax. We can't let them think they can just waltz into our territory and start making demands," Rook growled, running a hand through his dark hair. Dax grunted in agreement. "They're getting bolder. Last week it was just threats. Now they're shaking down businesses on our turf." Rook's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his beard. The thought of those serpents slithering through the streets he'd sworn to protect made his blood boil. But beneath the anger, a cold fear gripped his heart. His brothers, his family, they were all at risk. "We need to send a message," Rook said, his voice low and dangerous. "Show them that the Shadow Ravens aren't to be fucked with." Dax nodded, his eyes narrowing. "What's the play, boss?" Rook paused, weighing his options. The wrong move could escalate this into a full-blown war, but doing nothing wasn't an option either. He could almost feel the weight of the club's patch on his back, reminding him of his duty to protect and lead. "Call everyone in," he said finally, his tone brooking no argument. "We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control." Dax raised an eyebrow, a rare show of surprise on his typically stoic face. "All hands on deck, huh? Must be serious." "Damn right it is," Rook replied, his voice hardening. "I want every Shadow Raven here within the hour. No excuses." As Dax moved to carry out the order, Rook caught his arm. Their eyes met, years of trust and shared battles passing between them in a silent exchange. "We've faced worse, brother," Rook said softly, allowing a hint of vulnerability to creep into his voice. "We'll weather this storm too." Dax's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Always do, Rook. Always do." As his right-hand man left to rally the troops, Rook turned to face the wall adorned with photos of fallen brothers. Their faces stared back at him, a grim reminder of the cost of this life he'd chosen. He silently vowed to do whatever it took to keep his family safe, even if it meant war with the Iron Vipers. The roar of approaching motorcycles signaled the arrival of his brothers. Rook squared his shoulders, pushing aside his doubts and fears. It was time to be the leader they needed, the rock they could depend on in the coming storm. The clubhouse door swung open, and a sea of leather-clad figures poured in. The air crackled with tension as the Shadow Ravens filled the room, their faces etched with concern and determination. Rook stood at the head of the long wooden table, watching as his brothers took their places around it. Diesel, a hulking man with arms like tree trunks, clapped a hand on Rook's shoulder as he passed. "We're with you, boss. Whatever it takes." Rook nodded, grateful for the show of support. His gaze swept the room, taking in the familiar faces. Snake, wiry and quick-witted, leaned against the wall, his fingers tapping an impatient rhythm on his thigh. Ace, the club's resident tech genius, settled into a chair, his laptop never far from reach. "All right, listen up." Rook's deep voice cut through the murmur of conversation, instantly commanding attention. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on their leader. "We've got a situation brewing with the Iron Vipers. They're pushing boundaries, testing our resolve. But we're not about to roll over and let them take what's ours." He paused, letting his words sink in. The tension in the room was palpable, a mix of anger and anticipation. "We've built something here," Rook continued, his voice low and intense. "A brotherhood, a family, and family protects its own. That's our code, has been since day one. It's what separates us from the likes of the Vipers." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Rook felt a swell of pride in his chest. These men, his brothers, would follow him into hell if he asked. But with that loyalty came a heavy responsibility, one that weighed on him more with each passing day. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it," he said, his piercing gaze sweeping the room. "This could get ugly, but I need to know you're all in. That when push comes to shove, we stand together. No man left behind. No territory surrendered. We are the Shadow Ravens, and it's high time we remind everyone what that means." A chorus of affirmations filled the air. Fists pounded on the table, voices raised in solidarity. Rook allowed himself a small smile, feeling the energy in the room shift from tension to determination. As he looked at the faces of his brothers, ready to ride into battle at his command, Rook felt a mix of pride and fear. He'd do anything to protect them, but the weight of their lives in his hands was a burden that never eased. "All right," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Here's what we're gonna do." Rook paused, his eyes locking with Dax's across the room. With a subtle nod, he ceded the floor to his right-hand man. Dax stepped forward, his imposing figure commanding instant attention. The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on him. Rook watched, a hint of pride tugging at the corners of his mouth. Dax had come a long way from the scrappy kid he'd taken under his wing years ago. "Listen up," Dax growled, his gravelly voice filling the clubhouse. "The Vipers are expecting us to hit hard and fast. That's what they're prepared for, but we're gonna do something different." Rook leaned against the bar, his arms crossed, listening intently. Dax's tactical mind had saved their asses more times than he could count. "We split into 3 teams," Dax continued, his fingers tracing invisible lines on the map spread before him. "Team 1 creates a diversion here, at their main hangout. Team 2 hits their supply warehouse. And Team 3? He paused, his eyes glinting with a dangerous light. "Team 3 takes out their communications hub." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Rook nodded, impressed. It was a solid plan, one that would cripple the Vipers without unnecessarily endangering their own men. As Dax outlined the specifics of each team's role, Rook found his mind wandering to the potential consequences. The plan was good, but the risks were still high. He'd seen too many good men go down in this life, and the thought of losing any more of his brothers made his stomach churn. When Dax finished, Rook pushed off from the bar and made his way to his side. The rest of the club dispersed, discussing their roles in hushed, excited tones. "It's a good plan," Rook said quietly, his eyes meeting Dax's. "But you know as well as I do, things can go sideways fast in this game." Dax nodded, his expression grim. "I know, brother. But we can't let them keep pushing us. If we don't stand our ground now, we might as well hand over our kudas and call it quits." Rook ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on him. "And if we lose someone? If this escalates beyond our control?" "Then we deal with it," Dax replied, his voice low and firm. "Together, like we always have." Rook nodded, grateful for Dax's unwavering support. But as he looked around at the men preparing for battle, he couldn't shake the gnawing fear in his gut. The territory was important, but these men, his family, were everything. And he'd be damned if he'd let any harm come to them. Rook's jaw clenched as he made his final decision. The clubhouse fell silent as he strode to the center of the room, his presence commanding attention without a word spoken. "Listen up," he growled, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're not just defending our turf. We're sending a message. The Iron Vipers think they can push us around? They've got another thing coming." He locked eyes with each member as he laid out the plan, his tone brooking no argument. "We hit them hard and fast. Dax, you'll lead the first group to their main hangout. Smoke them out, but no casualties if we can help it. Snake, your team will intercept any reinforcements. I'll take point on securing their warehouse." Rook's voice softened slightly, a hint of his hidden warmth seeping through. "Watch each other's backs out there. We're family, and family protects its own." As he finished speaking, the clubhouse erupted into a flurry of activity. Members rushed to gear up, the air thick with anticipation and adrenaline. Rook observed as his brothers checked their weapons, adjusting leather vests and exchanging determined nods. Buzz, the youngest member, fumbled with his holster. Without a word, Rook stepped over and helped him secure it properly. "You good?" he asked, searching the kid's face for any sign of doubt. Buzz nodded, his eyes shining with a mix of fear and excitement. "Yeah, Prez. I won't let you down." Rook clapped him on the shoulder. "I know you won't. Stay close to Snake out there." As he moved through the room, Rook's mind raced with contingencies and worst-case scenarios, but seeing the unity and trust in his brothers' faces steadied him. They were ready. They were strong. And come hell or high water, the Shadow Ravens would remind everyone why they ruled this territory. Amid the controlled chaos, Rook found himself gravitating towards Dax. Their eyes met across the room, a silent conversation passing between them. Dax gave an almost imperceptible nod, his steely gaze softening for just a moment. Rook felt a familiar warmth bloom in his chest, the unshakable bond between them providing a steadying anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "We've been through worse," Dax muttered, his gravelly voice barely audible above the din. Rook's lips quirked into a half-smile. "That we have, brother. That we have." The air crackled with tension as the club members made their final preparations. Leather creaked, metal clinked, and hushed voices exchanged last-minute strategies. Rook's heart pounded, a steady rhythm echoing the gravity of the situation. "Mount up!" he barked, his authoritative tone cutting through the buzz of activity. As one, the Shadow Ravens moved towards the exit. Rook felt the weight of their trust, their loyalty, settling on his shoulders. He squared them, ready to bear that burden and lead his family into the fire. "Let's remind those vipers why they should have stayed in their own damn territory," Rook growled, his hand on the clubhouse door. The air outside was crisp, carrying the promise of impending conflict. Engines roared to life, a symphony of power and determination. Rook swung his leg over his bike, the familiar rumble beneath him steadying his resolve. This was it. No turning back now. As the Shadow Ravens pulled out of the clubhouse lot, Rook led the pack. The rumble of engines filled the air, a thunderous chorus that seemed to echo the beating of his heart. He could feel the presence of his brothers behind him, their unwavering loyalty a tangible force at his back. "Watch for trouble," Rook growled into his helmet mic, his eyes scanning the darkening streets. Vipers could have eyes anywhere. The cool night air whipped past, carrying with it the scent of gasoline and impending rain. Rook's knuckles whitened on the handlebars as he considered the potential outcomes of this confrontation. Victory wasn't guaranteed, and the cost could be steep. As they rounded a corner, the neon lights of the city's outskirts bathed them in an eerie glow. Rook couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding into the mouth of a beast, one with iron fangs and venomous intent. "Rook," Dax's voice crackled through the comm. "You sure about this?" A moment of doubt flickered through Rook's mind, but he quashed it ruthlessly. "We protect our own," he replied, his voice steel. "No matter the cost." The roar of their engines faded into the night, leaving behind an ominous silence. Whatever awaited the Shadow Ravens, Rook knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same after tonight. Chapter 3. The acrid smell of burning rubber assaulted Ellie's nostrils as smoke billowed from beneath the hood of her ancient Volvo. She slammed her palms against the steering wheel, frustration bubbling up inside her like magma in a volcano about to erupt. "Come on, you piece of junk!" she growled, turning the key once more. The engine sputtered and wheezed but refused to catch. Ellie's gaze darted to the desolate stretch of road ahead, then to the rearview mirror. Nothing but darkness in both directions. Her heart raced as she realized just how isolated she was out here. This can't be happening. Not now. Not in this place. Not when I'm so close. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to center herself. Think, Ellie. What would Maris tell you to do? With trembling fingers, she reached for her phone. No service. Of course. A twig snapped in the shadows beyond her headlights, sending a jolt of adrenaline through her body. Ellie's head whipped toward the sound, her eyes straining to pierce the inky blackness. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice wavering slightly despite her attempt at bravado. Silence answered her. Then, like a specter materializing from the gloom, a towering figure emerged. Broad-shouldered and menacing, he approached with measured steps. The dim glow of her headlights revealed a rugged face partially obscured by a thick beard, hard eyes glinting dangerously. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. Is this how it ends? Stranded on a back road, at the mercy of some leather-clad stranger? The man's deep voice rumbled through the night air. "What the hell are you doing out here?" Ellie swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Stay calm, don't show fear." "My car broke down," she managed, gesturing toward the smoking hood. "I'm just trying to get it started again." His eyes narrowed, sweeping over her in the vehicle. "This ain't exactly a main road. What brings you to these parts?" The intensity of his gaze made Ellie's skin prickle. She straightened her spine, meeting his stare with as much confidence as she could muster. "I'm just passing through," she said, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "Got turned around and ended up here." The man, Rook, she read on his vest, took another step closer. His massive frame loomed over her, radiating an aura of barely contained aggression. "You're awful close to our compound for someone who's just passing through," he growled. "So I'll ask you one more time, and I suggest you answer honestly. What are you doing here?" Ellie's heart thundered in her chest. She weighed her options, knowing that her next words could make or break this encounter. The truth hovered on the tip of her tongue, warring with her instinct for self-preservation. "This is it, Ellie. The moment you've been working towards. Don't blow it now." She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever came next. "I'm a journalist," Ellie said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm on a road trip, researching urban tribes for a series of articles. The Shadow Ravens caught my interest, and I was hoping to feature your club." Rook's eyebrows shot up, surprise briefly overtaking the suspicion on his rugged face. Ellie pressed on, seizing the moment. "I've had some contact with your club before. Nothing extensive, just preliminary research. But I believe there's a compelling story here, one that could shed light on the true nature of motorclubs like yours." She watched as Rook processed her words, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. "A journalist, huh?" Rook's tone had lost some of its initial hostility, replaced by a cautious curiosity. "And what exactly do you think you know about the true nature of our club?" Ellie chose her next words carefully. "I know there's more to the Shadow Ravens than meets the eye. You're not just some rough-and-tumble biker gang. There's a brotherhood here, a code of honor. That's the story I want to tell." Rook's expression softened almost imperceptibly. He crossed his arms, regarding her with renewed interest. "You're either very brave or very foolish to come poking around here, Ms. Finch! Ellie Finch!" she supplied, offering a tentative smile. Rook nodded slowly as if coming to a decision. "Well, Ellie Finch, it seems we might have an opportunity here. You want a story, and well, let's just say we could use some good press." Ellie's heart leapt. This was it, her chance to get inside. She held her breath, waiting for Rook to continue. "How about this?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We give you refuge, access to the club. In exchange, you write an article that shows the Shadow Ravens in a positive light. Deal?" Ellie's mind raced, weighing the potential risks and rewards. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd been hoping for. But the dangers were undeniable. She glanced at Rook's imposing figure, his tattoos telling stories she could only imagine. I need a moment to think," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Rook nodded, his piercing gaze never leaving her face. "Take your time, darlin'. This ain't a decision to make lightly." Ellie turned away, her hazel eyes scanning the desolate landscape. The setting sun cast long shadows across the dusty road, mirroring the conflicting emotions within her. This could be the story that launched her career, the piece that finally got her name recognized in the cutthroat world of journalism. But at what cost? She took a deep breath, steeling herself before turning back to face Rook. "All right," she said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I accept your offer." Rook's eyebrows raised slightly, a hint of respect flickering in his eyes. "You've got guts. I'll give you that." Ellie stepped closer, determined. "I want you to know that I take this responsibility seriously. I promise to portray the Shadow Ravens fairly and accurately. You have my word." "Your word, huh?" Rook's lips quirked into a half smile. "That means something where you come from?" "It does to me," Ellie replied firmly. "And I'm truly grateful for this opportunity, Rook. I won't let you down." Rook studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he extended his hand. "Welcome to the Shadow Ravens, Ellie Finch. Let's hope neither of us lives to regret this." As Ellie grasped his calloused hand, she felt a jolt of electricity run through her. This was it, the moment her life would change forever. For better or worse, she was now inextricably linked to the world of the Shadow Ravens. Rook's powerful frame cast a long shadow as he led Ellie through the imposing iron gates of the compound. The air grew thick with the scent of motor oil and leather, mingling with an undercurrent of tension that made the hairs on the back of Ellie's neck stand up. "Keep close," Rook muttered, his eyes scanning the area with practiced vigilance. Ellie's keen gaze darted from one sight to another, her journalistic instincts kicking into overdrive. Rows of gleaming motorcycles lined the perimeter, their chrome accents catching the fading sunlight. Men and women in leather jackets adorned with the Shadow Raven's emblem moved about with purpose, some eyeing her with curiosity, others with open suspicion. "Quite the operation you've got here," Ellie remarked, her voice low. "I can see why you're so protective of it." Rook grunted in response, leading her towards a cluster of buildings at the heart of the compound. "This is our home, our family. We look out for our own." As they approached, a tall woman with jet black hair braided down her back stepped forward, her intense eyes fixed on Ellie. "So, this is our guest?" she asked, her tone a blend of curiosity and caution. "Inara," Rook nodded. "This is Ellie Finch. She'll be staying with us for a while, working on a story about the club." Ellie extended her hand, acutely aware of the weight of Inara's gaze. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Inara." Inara's grip was firm as she shook Ellie's hand. "Welcome to the Shadow Ravens, Ellie. I hope you're ready for one hell of a ride." As Ellie looked around, she noticed the way the other members seemed to gravitate towards Inara, their body language speaking volumes about the respect they held for her. It was clear that beneath the tough exterior, there was a deep bond connecting these people. "I've never seen anything quite like this," Ellie admitted, her curiosity getting the better of her. "How long have you been with the Shadow Ravens, Inara?" A wistful smile played on Inara's lips. "Longer than I care to admit, but once you're in for life. It's more than just a club, it's family." Ellie nodded, her mind racing with questions. This was her chance to uncover the real story behind the Shadow Ravens, to peel back the layers of secrecy and reveal the human hearts beating beneath the leather and chrome. But as she caught Rook's watchful gaze, she knew she'd have to tread carefully. One wrong move, and this opportunity could vanish like smoke in the wind. As Ellie absorbed Inara's words, a hulking figure emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding immediate attention. Dax Thor Thornton, Rook's trusted lieutenant, fixed Ellie with a penetrating stare that sent a shiver down her spine. "What's your angle, journalist?" Thor's gravelly voice cut through the air like a blade. "We don't take kindly to outsiders poking around our business." Ellie squared her shoulders, meeting Thor's gaze with unwavering determination. "I'm here to tell your story, Mr. Thornton. The real story of the Shadow Ravens, not the sensationalized version the media usually portrays." Thor's eyes narrowed. "And why should we trust you?" "Because I give you my word," Ellie replied, her voice steady. "I'm committed to portraying the club in a fair and positive light. My goal is to show the world the brotherhood and loyalty that exists here." Rook stepped forward, placing a hand on Thor's shoulder. "She's here at my invitation, Dax. I believe her intentions are genuine." Thor grunted, his suspicion still evident, Just remember, little bird, one wrong move and you'll find out why they call me Thor. Ellie nodded, her heart racing. I understand. Thank you for your concern for the club's welfare. It speaks volumes about the bond you share. Rook cleared his throat. Come on, Ellie, let me show you where you'll be staying. As they walked away, Ellie could feel Thor's eyes boring into her back. She knew she'd have to work hard to earn his trust, but the challenge only fueled her determination. Rook led her through a maze of corridors, the worn concrete walls adorned with club memorabilia and faded photographs. They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door, which Rook pushed open to reveal a small but comfortable room. It's not much, Rook said, his voice softening slightly. But you'll be safe here. No one enters this part of the compound without my permission. Ellie stepped inside, taking in the modest furnishings, a single bed, a desk, and a small dresser. Despite its simplicity, the room felt oddly welcoming. Thank you, Rook, she said, turning to face him. I appreciate your hospitality and your trust in me. A ghost of a smile played on Rook's lips. Don't make me regret it, Ellie. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll talk more about what you can and can't write about. As Rook closed the door behind him, Ellie sank onto the bed, her mind whirling with the events of the day. She was in the heart of the Shadow Raven's world now, and the story of a lifetime was within her grasp. But as she looked around the Spartan room, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was stepping into something far more complex and potentially dangerous than she had ever imagined. Ellie ran her fingers through her hair, exhaling slowly as she tried to process her situation. The worn springs of the bed creaked softly beneath her, a stark reminder of how far she was from her usual comfort zone. Her hazel eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail as her journalistic instincts kicked in. What have I gotten myself into? She murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached for her bag, pulling out her notebook and pen. As she flipped through the pages, her earlier notes seemed trivial compared to the potential story unfolding before her. Ellie's hand hovered over a blank page, mind racing. This could make my career, she thought, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Or it could be the biggest mistake I've ever made. Outside her room, the low rumble of motorcycles and muffled voices served as a constant reminder of the world she had entered. Ellie closed her eyes, trying to picture how her article might take shape. Meanwhile, Rook found himself pacing in his own quarters, his thoughts unexpectedly consumed by the determined journalist he had just left. He ran a hand over his bearded chin, conflicted by the emotions stirring within him. She's not like anyone I've met before, he muttered to himself, shaking his head as if to clear his thoughts. But she could be trouble for the club, for me. Despite his reservations, Rook couldn't deny the spark of intrigue Ellie had ignited. Her fearlessness in pursuing this story, her quick thinking when confronted, it all spoke to a strength of character that resonated with him. As the night wore on, both Ellie and Rook found themselves grappling with the unexpected turn of events, each sensing that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't yet fathom. The soft knock on Ellie's door startled her from her thoughts. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob before slowly turning it. Rook stood there, his imposing figure filling the doorframe. Thought you might want some company, he said, his voice gruff but tinged with an unexpected softness. Ellie nodded, stepping back to let him in. I'd like that, actually. This place is a bit overwhelming. As Rook entered, Ellie caught a whiff of leather and motor oil, a scent she was quickly associating with him. They settled into chairs across from each other, an awkward silence hanging between them. So, Ellie began, her journalistic instincts kicking in, how did you end up leading the Shadow Ravens? Rook's piercing gaze met hers. It's a long story, he said, a hint of a smile playing at his lips. But I guess we've got time. As Rook began to speak, Ellie found herself captivated by his tale of finding brotherhood and purpose in the club. His words painted a picture of a world so different from her own, yet she found herself drawn to the sense of loyalty and freedom he described. What about you? Rook asked, leaning forward. What drives a woman like you to chase stories in places like this? Ellie's eyes lit up. The truth, she said passionately. There are so many stories out there that need to be told, voices that need to be heard. I want to make a difference, to shed light on the parts of our world that often go unseen. As they continued to talk, sharing snippets of their lives, Ellie was surprised to find how easily the conversation flowed. Despite their different backgrounds, she and Rook shared a fierce independence and a desire to carve their own paths in the world. You know, Rook said, his voice lowering, you're not what I expected, Ellie. She felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. Neither are you, Rook, she replied softly. Their eyes locked, and Ellie felt a sudden shift in the air between them. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface all evening suddenly crackled with intensity. Rook leaned in closer, his hand brushing against hers. This could complicate things, Ellie thought, her heart racing. But as Rook's fingers intertwined with hers, she found herself not caring about the complications. For this moment, all that mattered was the connection sparking between them, promising something she hadn't even known she was looking for. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as Rook's thumb traced circles on her palm. The rough calluses of his hand sent shivers down her spine, igniting a fire she hadn't felt in years. She leaned in, drawn by an invisible force, their faces mere inches apart. Ellie, Rook murmured, his voice husky. This is dangerous, she finished, her eyes flicking to his lips. A loud crash from outside shattered the moment. Ellie jumped, her heart pounding for an entirely different reason now. Rook was on his feet in an instant, his body tense and alert. Stay here, he commanded, already moving towards the door. Ellie's journalistic instincts warred with her common sense. But Please, Rook said, his eyes softening for a moment. I need to know you're safe. As the door closed behind him, Ellie sank back onto the bed, her mind reeling. What was she doing? Getting involved with the leader of a motor club was the last thing she should be considering. And yet, the sounds of muffled shouting filtered through the walls. Ellie strained to hear, her curiosity battling with the lingering warmth of Rook's touch. Whatever was happening out there, she realized, could be crucial to her story. But more than that, she found herself worrying about Rook's safety. What have I gotten myself into? She whispered to the empty room, torn between the pull of her ambition and the unexpected tug on her heart. Chapter 4. Ellie's eyes fluttered open, her vision blurring as she tried to focus on her unfamiliar surroundings. The acrid scent of motor oil assaulted her nostrils, jolting her fully awake. Dim fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the cavernous garage. Hulking shapes loomed in the darkness. Motorcycles, she realized, their chrome accents glinting dully. Ellie's heart raced as the events of the previous night came rushing back. I'm really doing this, she thought, a mix of excitement and trepidation coursing through her. I'm embedded with the Shadow Ravens. The click of boot heels on concrete echoed through the space. Ellie tensed, her journalist's instincts kicking in as she prepared to observe and analyze whoever was approaching. A woman emerged from the shadows, her long black braids swinging as she walked. Even in the low light, Ellie could make out the sharp planes of her face and the intensity in her dark eyes. This must be Inara, she realized. Morning, sunshine, Inara said, her voice husky but warm. Thought you could use a pick-me-up. She extended a steaming mug of coffee and a plate piled with muffins still warm from the oven. Ellie's stomach growled traitorously. Thank you, she said, accepting the offerings. I didn't realize how hungry I was. Inara settled cross-legged on the floor beside her. First night in a new place is always rough. How'd you sleep? About as well as can be expected on a strange place, Ellie admitted, taking a sip of the strong coffee. It was bitter but grounding, helping to clear the fog from her mind. Inara chuckled. Yeah, it's not exactly the Ritz, but you get used to it. She studied Ellie with keen interest. So, what made a nice girl like you decide to shack up with a bunch of bikers? Ellie chose her words carefully, aware that everything she said could impact her story, and potentially her safety. I'm curious about subcultures, the bonds that form in tight-knit communities. There's so much misunderstanding about motor clubs. I want to show the human side. Noble goal, Inara mused. But be careful, sweetheart. Some truths are better left buried. A chill ran down Ellie's spine at the cryptic warning. What secrets was Inara hinting at? And how far was Ellie willing to go to uncover them? Ellie rose to her feet, brushing off her jeans. Lead the way, she said, gesturing for Inara to guide her. As they walked through the compound, Ellie's journalistic instincts kicked into overdrive. Her eyes darted from one site to another, drinking in every detail. The hallway they traversed was lined with motorcycles, their chrome finishes gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Each bike seemed to have its own personality, from sleek sport models to hefty cruisers adorned with intricate decals. Is this a museum or a garage? Ellie wondered, her fingers itching to capture the scene with her camera. The air was thick with the scent of motor oil and leather, an oddly comforting aroma that spoke of dedication and craftsmanship. Impressive collection, Ellie remarked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Inara's lips curved into a proud smile. Each one has a story, she said, running her hand along the handlebar of a particularly imposing Harley. Just like each of us. They entered the kitchen, a surprisingly homey space that contrasted sharply with the industrial feel of the rest of the compound. The sizzle of bacon on the stove and the rich aroma of coffee created an almost domestic atmosphere. As Inara busied herself at the stove, Ellie leaned against the counter, her notepad at the ready. So, how did you end up with the Shadow Ravens? She asked, aiming for casual curiosity. Inara's eyes took on a faraway look. It's not a fairy tale, if that's what you're expecting, she said, flipping the bacon with practiced ease. I was young, angry, looking for somewhere to belong. The Ravens gave me that. Ellie nodded, scribbling notes. And now? Now? Inara's smile was genuine, reaching her eyes. They're my family. We've been through hell and back together. That kind of bond, it's unbreakable. As Ellie listened, she felt a pang of envy. Her own life had always been solitary, driven by ambition rather than connection. Could she ever understand the depth of loyalty Inara described? Inara's hand on Ellie's shoulder jolted her from her reverie. It's time, Inara said softly, her dark eyes searching Ellie's face. Ready to meet the rest of the family? Ellie's heart began to race, a mix of excitement and trepidation flooding her veins. She nodded, gripping her notepad tightly as she followed Inara down a dimly lit corridor. The meeting room door loomed before them, heavy and imposing. Inara pushed it open, and Ellie stepped inside, her senses immediately overwhelmed. The air was thick with the scent of leather and cigarette smoke. Around a long, scarred table sat an assortment of men and women, each bearing the unmistakable look of seasoned bikers. Tattoos snaked up muscular arms, and weathered faces turned to assess the newcomer. Ellie's gaze darted from face to face, cataloging details with journalistic precision. A man with a shock of silver hair and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. A woman whose delicate features belied the hardness in her eyes. And at the head of the table, commanding attention without uttering a word, sat Rook. Take a seat, Inara murmured, gesturing to an empty chair. Ellie slid into place, acutely aware of the eyes upon her. She set her notepad on the table, her camera a reassuring weight against her hip. Her fingers itched to start capturing images, but she resisted, sensing that now was not the time. Rook's deep voice cut through the tension. Let's get down to business, he said, his piercing gaze sweeping the room before landing on Ellie. We've got a situation brewing with the Iron Vipers. A low murmur rippled through the assembled bikers. Ellie's pen hovered over her notepad, her mind racing. Who were the Iron Vipers? Rivals? Enemies? They've been pushing into our territory, Rook continued, his jaw tightening. Testing our limits. We need to decide how to respond. Ellie's heart pounded as she listened, torn between professional excitement at the story unfolding before her and a growing unease. She was an outsider here, privy to information that could be dangerous. As Rook's words painted a picture of rising tensions and potential violence, Ellie wondered if she had bitten off more than she could chew. As Rook spoke, Ellie's pen danced across the page, capturing snippets of conversation and observations. Her eyes darted from face to face, noting the subtle nods of agreement, the clenched jaws of frustration, the occasional smirk of anticipation. There was an undeniable electricity in the air, a mix of camaraderie and danger that sent shivers down her spine. "We stand together," a burly man with a salt and pepper beard growled, his fist thumping on the table. "No one messes with the shadow ravens." A chorus of agreement echoed through the room. Ellie's gaze lingered on Rook, watching as a ghost of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. His eyes, usually hard as flint, softened for just a moment as he looked at his brothers. "Family," Ellie thought, scribbling the word in her notes. "That's what this is. A dangerous, unconventional family, but a family nonetheless." The creak of the door opening cut through the discussion. Ellie's head snapped up, her breath catching in her throat as Thor's imposing figure filled the doorway. His eyes, cold and piercing, locked onto her immediately. Ellie's stomach clenched, her earlier unease blossoming into full-fledged anxiety. Thor's massive frame seemed to suck all the air out of the room as he moved towards an empty chair, his movements taut with suspicion. "Don't let him see you sweat," Ellie coached herself, forcing her breathing to remain steady. "You have every right to be here. Remember that." But as Thor settled into his seat, his gaze never leaving her, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that she was a lamb among wolves, and one of them had just scented blood. Thor's gravelly voice cut through the tension like a serrated blade. "So, Miss Finch," he drawled, each word dripping with skepticism. "Why don't you tell us exactly what you're hoping to achieve here?" Ellie straightened her spine, meeting Thor's piercing gaze head-on. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice remained steady. "I'm here to understand, Mr. Thornton. To peel back the layers and show the world the truth about the Shadow Ravens." A low murmur rippled through the room. Thor's eyes narrowed. "The truth? And what truth would that be?" Ellie took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "The truth that there's more to this club than what meets the eye. That you're not just leather and motorcycles, but a brotherhood with its own code, its own honor." Thor leaned forward, his massive forearms resting on the table. "Pretty words, Miss Finch. But how do we know you won't twist that truth to fit whatever narrative sells more papers?" The accusation stung, but Ellie refused to flinch. "Because that's not who I am," she said firmly. "I'm a journalist, yes, but I'm also someone who believes in telling stories honestly. I want to understand your world, not exploit it." As she spoke, Ellie's gaze flickered to Rook. His expression was unreadable, but there was an intensity in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Thor's jaw clenched, clearly unsatisfied with her answer. He opened his mouth to press further, but Rook's hand on his shoulder stopped him. "A word, brother," Rook said quietly, nodding towards the corner of the room. Ellie watched as the two men moved away, their heads bent close together in hushed conversation. Her fingers itched to take notes, to capture the tension vibrating in the air, but she resisted. Instead, she strained her ears, trying to catch fragments of their whispered exchange. What are they saying? She wondered, her imagination running wild. Is Thor convincing Rook to throw me out? Or is Rook defending my presence here? The anticipation was almost unbearable. Ellie's future, both her story and her growing connection to this world, hung in the balance of that whispered conversation. All she could do was wait, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs as the two men decided her fate. Ellie's breath caught as Rook's expression shifted. The hard lines of concern softened, replaced by a flicker of something that looked remarkably like trust. He turned, his piercing gaze finding her across the room. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as their eyes locked. A subtle nod from Rook sent a wave of relief washing over Ellie. It was as if a silent understanding had passed between them, bridging the chasm of suspicion that had existed mere moments ago. All right, that's all for today. Rook's deep voice resonated through the room, breaking the spell. Ride safe, brothers and sisters. As the meeting concluded, Ellie gathered her belongings with trembling hands. Her mind buzzed with the wealth of information she'd gleaned, connections forming and story threads weaving together. "Hey, city girl," a gruff voice called out. Ellie looked up to see a weathered biker giving her a brief nod. "You ain't half bad." She returned the nod, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thanks, I think." As she made her way towards the exit, Ellie exchanged similar nods and fleeting smiles with other club members. Each interaction felt like a tiny victory, a crack in the wall of suspicion that had initially surrounded her. "I'm making progress," she thought, heart swelling with a mix of pride and excitement. They're starting to see me as more than just an outsider. Yet, as she caught Thor's wary gaze from across the room, Ellie knew the battle wasn't entirely won. Acceptance, it seemed, would be hard-earned in the world of the Shadow Ravens. Ellie slipped into her temporary quarters, closing the door behind her with a soft click. The room, sparse and utilitarian, had become her sanctuary in this unfamiliar world of leather and chrome. She leaned against the door, exhaling slowly, her mind still reeling from the meeting. "Focus, Ellie," she murmured to herself, pushing off the door and making her way to the makeshift desk in the corner. She settled into the creaky chair, spreading out her notes and recordings. The scent of motor oil clung to her clothes, a constant reminder of where she was. Ellie's eyes darted over her scribbled observations, each word a piece of the puzzle she was determined to solve. Her fingers hovered over the laptop keyboard, trembling slightly with anticipation. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's do this." As she began to type, the words flowed like a river breaking through a dam. The clatter of keys filled the small room, punctuated by occasional pauses as Ellie referred to her notes or replayed a snippet of recorded conversation. "The Shadow Ravens," she typed, "more than just a motorcycle club, a family forged in chrome and loyalty." Ellie paused, her brow furrowing. "Is that too cliché?" she wondered. "No, it captures their essence." She continued typing, losing herself in the narrative. Suddenly, a knock at the door startled her from her focus. Ellie's heart raced as she called out, "Who is it?" "It's Inara," came the reply. "Just checking if you need anything." Ellie relaxed slightly. "I'm good, thanks. Just working on my notes." "All right, honey. Don't work too hard." As Inara's footsteps faded, Ellie turned back to her laptop. Her eyes fell on the last sentence she'd written. "At the heart of the Shadow Ravens stands a man as enigmatic as the club itself." She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keys. Rook's intense gaze flashed in her mind, sending a shiver down her spine. "Get it together, Finch," she chided herself. "You're here to write a story, not fall for it." But even as she resumed typing, Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that she was already in, too deep. Chapter 5. Ellie leaned against the grimy wall of the Shadow Ravens compound, her keen eyes darting from one leather-clad figure to another. The smell of oil and cigarette smoke hung in the air, a palpable reminder of the world she had stepped into. At the center of it all stood Rook. "Listen up." Rook's gravelly voice cut through the din. "You all know we've got a situation with the Iron Vipers. They're encroaching on our territory again." Ellie's pulse quickened. This was the kind of insider information she'd been hoping for. She watched as Rook's tattooed arms gestured emphatically, his words carrying a weight that commanded respect from every member present. "Blade, I want you and your crew to patrol the eastern border. Make sure those bastards know we're not backing down," Rook ordered, his piercing gaze fixed on a tall, scarred man who nodded in response. Ellie's fingers itched to reach for her notebook, but she resisted. She couldn't risk drawing attention to herself now, not when she was finally getting a glimpse of the real Rook in action. His leadership style was a fascinating blend of authority and camaraderie, she noted mentally. As the meeting dispersed, Ellie saw her chance. She pushed off the wall and approached Rook, her heart hammering in her chest. "That was quite the display of leadership," she said, injecting a note of casual admiration into her voice. Rook's eyes narrowed as he turned to face her. "This isn't a show, sweetheart. It's life and death for us." Ellie bristled at the patronizing tone but pressed on. I understand that, but surely there's more to the Shadow Ravens than just territorial disputes. What about your community outreach programs? A flicker of surprise crossed Rook's face before his expression hardened again. You've been doing your homework, I see, but don't think for a second that you understand what we're about. Ellie felt a spark of frustration ignite within her. She'd faced tough subjects before, but Rook's walls seemed impenetrable. Still, she couldn't deny the thrill of the challenge. Then help me understand, she persisted. What drives you to lead this life? Rook's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Ellie thought he might walk away. Instead, he leaned in close, his voice low and intense. Listen carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. The Ravens are my family. Everything I do is to protect them. That's all you need to know. As he spoke, Ellie caught a glimpse of something in his eyes, a fierce loyalty that both intrigued and unnerved her. She realized she was treading a dangerous line between professional curiosity and personal fascination. Family, Ellie repeated softly, her mind racing. That's a powerful motivator, but at what cost? Rook's expression darkened. You're asking questions you don't want answers to, darlin'. For your own sake, I suggest you drop it. As he turned to walk away, Ellie felt a mix of frustration and determination wash over her. She had barely scratched the surface of Rook's world, and despite his warnings, she knew she couldn't let this story go. The journalist in her was hooked, even as another part of her, a part she wasn't quite ready to acknowledge, was drawn to the enigmatic man himself. Ellie's heart raced as she watched Rook's retreating form. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. Taking a deep breath, she called out, I've seen how you care for them, Rook. The way you protect your people. It's admirable. Rook paused mid-stride, his broad shoulders tensing. Slowly, he turned back to face her, his piercing gaze searching her face for any sign of insincerity. Ellie held her ground, meeting his eyes with unwavering determination. Admirable, he scoffed, but there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. Most people would call it dangerous. Ellie took a cautious step forward. Maybe, but I'm not most people. I see the loyalty, the sense of purpose. It's more than just a club, isn't it? For a moment, Rook's tough exterior wavered. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed almost vulnerable. It's everything, he admitted quietly. These people, they depend on me. I can't let them down. Ellie's journalistic instincts kicked into high gear, but she tempered her excitement. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a glimpse into Rook's carefully guarded heart. That's a heavy burden to carry, she said softly, genuinely moved by his admission. Rook's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Ellie saw past the hardened leader to the man beneath. Yeah, well, he murmured, his voice gruff with emotion. Someone's gotta do it. As they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken tension, Ellie realized she was crossing a line she might never be able to uncross. But in that moment, with Rook's walls beginning to crumble, she found she didn't care. Ellie leaned against the weathered wooden railing of the club's porch, her notebook forgotten in her lap. The evening air was thick with the scent of motor oil and leather, a heady combination that was becoming strangely comforting. So, you've dedicated your life to uncovering the truth, Rook mused, his deep voice resonating in the quiet night. What drives you, Ellie? She paused, weighing her words carefully. The same thing that drives you, I think. A sense of purpose, a need to make a difference. Rook's eyebrow quirked, a gesture that sent an unexpected flutter through Ellie's stomach. You think what we do is the same? Not on the surface, no, Ellie admitted, her fingers absently tracing the spiral binding of her notebook. But at the core, we're both fighting for something bigger than ourselves. As if on cue, a commotion erupted from inside the clubhouse. Rook tensed immediately, his entire demeanor shifting. Ellie watched, transfixed, as he strode purposefully towards the noise. Stay here, he commanded, his tone brooking no argument. Ellie's heart raced as she observed Rook effortlessly take control of the situation. His presence alone seemed to calm the brewing storm among his club members. His words, though too low for her to hear, carried weight and authority. God, he's magnificent, Ellie thought, then immediately chastised herself for the unprofessional observation. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt towards him, stronger with each passing moment. As Rook returned to her side, his face etched with concern for his family, Ellie felt a warmth spread through her chest. This man, so feared by many, cared so deeply for those under his protection. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. Rook's eyes met hers, a hint of surprise in them, as if he'd forgotten she was there. "Yeah," he said, his voice gentle. "Just a misunderstanding." In that moment, Ellie saw beyond the tough exterior to the compassionate heart beneath, and she knew she was in trouble. Rook's gaze lingered on Ellie, his steel-gray eyes softening for a fleeting moment before he looked away, his jaw clenching. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that betrayed his internal struggle. "This connection," he began, his voice low and gravelly. "It's not something I can afford to explore, Ellie. The club? They're my family. My responsibility." Ellie's heart clenched, but she pushed aside her disappointment, recognizing the vulnerability in Rook's admission. "I understand," she said softly. "Loyalty is important to you. It's one of the things I admire about you, actually." Rook's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You admire that about me?" Ellie nodded, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "I do. It's rare to find someone so dedicated to their cause, their people." A heavy silence fell between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Ellie's fingers itched to reach out and touch him, to bridge the physical gap that mirrored their emotional one. "What about you?" Rook asked suddenly, his intense gaze fixed on her. "What are you afraid of, Ellie?" The question caught her off guard. She inhaled sharply, weighing her words carefully. "I'm afraid of losing myself," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of getting so caught up in a story that I forget who I am." Rook nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "And right now? With this story? With me?" Ellie's heart raced. "I'm terrified," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Because for the first time, I'm not sure if I can separate the story from my—" Rook's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to Ellie's lips. The tension between them crackled, electric and undeniable. Ellie's breath hitched as Rook leaned in, his calloused hand cupping her cheek. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin. Ellie's response was to close the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a searing kiss. The world fell away as Rook pulled her closer, his strong arms encircling her waist. Ellie melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair as their kisses grew more urgent, passionate. They stumbled backwards, Ellie's back hitting the wall with a soft thud. Rook broke away, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice husky with desire. Ellie nodded, her heart pounding. "I want this. I want you," she breathed. Their lips crashed together, hands roaming, exploring. Clothes were shed hastily as they made their way to the bedroom, a trail of discarded fabric marking their path. Ellie gasped as Rook lifted her, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her to the bed. Their lovemaking was intense, a perfect blend of tenderness and raw passion. Ellie lost herself in the sensation of Rook's hands on her body, his lips trailing fire across her skin. When they finally came together, it was with a shared cry of ecstasy, their bodies moving in perfect synchronicity. Afterwards, they lay tangled in the sheets, a comfortable silence settling between them. Ellie traced lazy patterns on Rook's chest, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. "What are you thinking?" Rook asked softly, his fingers combing through her tousled hair. Ellie sighed, propping herself up on one elbow to meet his gaze. "I'm thinking about how complicated this is," she admitted. "About how much I want this, want you, but—" "But you're worried about the consequences," Rook finished for her, understanding etched on his face. Ellie nodded, her hazel eyes clouded with uncertainty. She sat up, pulling the sheet around her as she gathered her thoughts. I need to talk to Maris, she said softly, more to herself than to Rook. She glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. She's probably going to kill me. Rook chuckled, the sound deep and rich. Your best friend doesn't approve of me, I take it? It's not you specifically, Ellie explained, running a hand through her disheveled hair. It's this whole world, the danger, the unpredictability. She worries. Ellie's phone buzzed on the nightstand, as if summoned by their conversation. It was a text from Maris. We need to talk. Lunch tomorrow? Speak of the devil, Ellie murmured, showing Rook the message. He nodded, his expression growing serious. You should go. Sort things out with her. He paused, his piercing gaze holding hers. And figure out what you want, Ellie. Because it's not going to be easy. Ellie swallowed hard, her heart clenching at the vulnerability in Rook's eyes. I know, she whispered. But I think it might be worth it. As she dressed and prepared to leave, Ellie's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She knew the conversation with Maris would be challenging, but she needed her friend's perspective. She needed to make sense of the storm brewing in her heart. Ellie's fingers traced the cool metal of Rook's motorcycle, her heart thrumming with anticipation. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Shadow Raven's compound as she watched Rook approach, his leather jacket slung casually over one shoulder. Ready for that ride, darlin'? Rook's gravelly voice sent a shiver down her spine. Ellie nodded, a mix of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. As I'll ever be, she replied, her voice betraying a hint of apprehension. Rook's eyes softened as he handed her a helmet. We don't have to do this if you're not comfortable, he said, his usual gruff exterior giving way to genuine concern. No, I want to, Ellie assured him, strapping on the helmet. It's been a while since I've been on a bike. Rook swung his leg over the motorcycle, the engine roaring to life beneath him. Just hold on tight, he instructed, his voice low and reassuring. Ellie climbed on behind him, her arms tentatively encircling his waist. As they pulled out of the compound, she found herself instinctively tightening her grip, pressing closer to Rook's solid warmth. The countryside unfurled before them like a living canvas, golden fields giving way to lush forests. Ellie felt her anxiety melt away, replaced by a sense of exhilaration. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of wildflowers and pine. After about an hour, Rook slowed the bike, pulling off onto a secluded overlook. The valley stretched out below them, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. It's beautiful, Ellie breathed, removing her helmet and drinking in the view. Rook nodded, his eyes fixed on her rather than the landscape. Yeah, it is, he murmured. As they settled on a nearby boulder, Ellie felt the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. So, she began, her journalistic instincts kicking in, tell me something about yourself that isn't in your club file. Rook raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement in his eyes. Fishing for more story material, Ms. Finch? Ellie shook her head, her expression earnest. No, just trying to know you better. The real you, not just the Shadow Raven's leader. Rook's gaze softened, and he was quiet for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. I used to draw, he finally said, his voice low. Before the club, before all of this, I wanted to be an artist. Ellie's eyes widened with surprise and curiosity. Really? What made you stop? A shadow crossed Rook's face. Life got in the way. The streets aren't kind to dreamers. Ellie felt a pang in her chest, recognizing the bittersweet tone of abandoned aspirations. She reached out, hesitantly placing her hand on his. Do you ever think about picking it up again? Rook's fingers twitched beneath hers, but he didn't pull away. Sometimes, he admitted. But the club, it's my life now. My responsibility. Ellie nodded, understanding the weight of duty all too well. It doesn't have to be one or the other, you know. You can be both Rook the leader and the artist. A wry smile tugged at the corner of Rook's mouth. You make it sound so simple. Maybe it could be, Ellie said softly, her heart racing as she held his gaze. The air between them seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Rook leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellie, The sharp trill of a phone cut through the moment. Rook cursed under his breath, fishing the device from his pocket. Club business, he said apologetically, standing up. As he walked a few paces away to take the call, Ellie hugged her knees to her chest, her mind whirling. The connection she felt with Rook was undeniable, but so were the complications. She was a journalist, he was the leader of a motor club with a questionable reputation. Their worlds couldn't be more different. And yet, as she watched Rook's silhouette against the fading sunlight, Ellie knew she was already in too deep to turn back now. Chapter 6. Ellie's fingers trembled as she punched in Maris's number, her heart racing with the urgency to share her latest discoveries. The phone's ring echoed in her ear as she paced her small apartment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. Hello? Maris's familiar voice crackled through the speaker. Maris? Ellie exclaimed, relief flooding her system. You won't believe what's happened. I've got so much to tell you about the Shadow Ravens and their leader Ronan. Whoa, slow down there, Sherlock, Maris chuckled, her tone laced with both amusement and concern. Take a breath and start from the beginning. Ellie inhaled deeply, trying to organize her thoughts. Her mind raced with images of leather jackets, roaring motorcycles, and Ronan's piercing gaze. Okay, so remember how I told you about that first encounter with the Shadow Ravens? Well, I've been spending more time with them, especially Ronan. He's not at all what I expected. She paused, biting her lip as she considered her next words. How could she possibly convey the intensity of her experiences? The way Ronan's presence seemed to electrify the very air around him? Go on, Maris prompted, her curiosity evident. He's complex, Maris, Ellie continued, her voice softening. Beneath that tough exterior, there's so much more. The way he leads the club, the loyalty he inspires, it's incredible. And when he looks at me, it's like... She trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Like what, Ellie? Maris pressed, a note of caution creeping into her voice. Ellie sank onto her couch, her free hand absently tracing patterns on the worn fabric. Like he sees right through me, past all my defenses. It's terrifying and exhilarating all at once. She recounted her most recent encounter with Ronan, describing how he'd invited her to a club gathering. You should have seen him, Maris. The way he commands respect, but also cares for his people. It's captivating. As she spoke, Ellie realized her heart was pounding, her cheeks flushed with the memory. She'd come into this assignment expecting to uncover the gritty truth behind a notorious motorcycle club. Instead, she found herself drawn into a world far more complex and alluring than she'd ever imagined. I know what you're thinking, Ellie said quickly, anticipating her friend's concerns. But this isn't just about the story anymore. There's something here, something real. I can feel it. Maris's sharp intake of breath crackled through the phone line. Ellie, honey, I hear you, but I'm worried. Her voice was laced with concern, the playful lilt Ellie was so accustomed to now absent. These guys, they're not just some weekend warrior bikers. The Shadow Ravens have a reputation, and it's not for their charity work. Ellie bit her lip, her free hand curling into a fist. She'd expected this reaction, but it still stung. I know the risks, Maris. I'm not naive. Are you sure? Maris pressed. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're getting in way over your head. This Ronan guy, he might seem exciting now, but... It's not like that, Ellie interjected, her voice rising slightly. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the flutter in her chest. You don't understand. When I'm there, in their world, it's electric. The rumble of the bikes, the leather and chrome, the way they all move as one unit. And Ronan, actually Rook, he's at the center of it all. Ellie closed her eyes, remembering the intoxicating scent of motor oil and leather that clung to Ronan, the way his calloused hands had briefly touched her arm, sending shivers down her spine. I've never felt so alive, Maris, so challenged. It's like I'm finally seeing the world in Technicolor. That's what scares me, Elle, Maris said softly. I get the appeal, I do. But these guys play by different rules. What happens when the story's over? When you're in too deep to get out? Ellie's stomach twisted at her friend's words, a flicker of doubt threatening to extinguish the warm glow of excitement she'd been basking in. But she pushed it aside, clinging to the memory of Ronan's intense gaze, the thrill of uncharted territory. Ellie paced the length of her small apartment, phone pressed to her ear. I hear you, Maris, I do. But this isn't just about the thrill. This story could be my big break. At what cost, though? Maris countered, her voice laced with concern. These guys aren't playing around, Elle. One wrong move and... I know the risks. Ellie interrupted, her free hand running through her hair. But I can handle it. I have to. Silence stretched between them for a moment. Ellie's mind raced, torn between her friend's valid concerns and the magnetic pull of the Shadow Raven's world. She could still feel the ghost of Rook's touch on her skin, hear the rumble of his voice in her ear. Just promise me you'll be careful, Maris finally said, her tone softening. I don't want to see you get hurt. Ellie's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and guilt. I promise, she said, meaning it. I'll keep my eyes open. But Maris, there's something about Ronan. He's not what I expected. She closed her eyes, picturing Rook's face, the hard lines of his jaw, the unexpected softness in his eyes when he looked at her. I think there's more to his story, to all of their stories. I need to find out what it is. And what if finding out puts you in danger? Maris asked quietly. Ellie's stomach churned. She knew her friend was right to worry, but the pull of the story, of Rook, was too strong to ignore. Then I'll deal with it, she said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. That's what journalists do, right? Ellie took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her phone. I know it sounds crazy, Maris, but I can't walk away from this. The Shadow Ravens, they're not just a story anymore. They're real people with real lives, and I need to understand them. Even if it puts you in harm's way? Maris's voice crackled with concern. Ellie's gaze drifted to her laptop, where her half-written notes glowed on the screen. The thrill of discovery tingled through her veins, a feeling she couldn't ignore. Sometimes the best stories come with risks, she said softly. And this could be the story that changes everything for me. She stood up, pacing her small apartment as adrenaline coursed through her. I appreciate your worry, Maris. I really do. But I can't let fear hold me back, not when I'm so close to something big. Ellie, Maris began, but Ellie cut her off gently. I hear you, I promise. And your advice means the world to me, but I have to see this through. Ellie's voice softened. You know me, Maris. You know how long I've waited for a break like this. A long sigh echoed through the phone. I do know you, Maris admitted. That's why I'm terrified. Just don't lose yourself in this, okay? Remember who you are. Ellie's throat tightened with emotion. I won't forget. And Maris, thank you for always having my back, even when you think I'm being reckless. As she ended the call, Ellie felt a mix of determination and trepidation settle in her chest. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential danger. But the pull of the unknown, the allure of Rook and his world, was impossible to resist. With a deep breath, she turned back to her laptop, ready to dive deeper into the shadows. Ellie's fingers hovered over the keyboard, her mind racing with the complexities of Rook's world. The Shadow Ravens weren't just a motor club. They were a labyrinth of unspoken rules, fierce loyalties, and hidden agendas. She bit her lip, recalling the intensity in Rook's eyes when he spoke of the club's code. There's so much more beneath the surface, she murmured to herself, typing furiously. It's not just about the bikes or the brotherhood. It's a way of life. As she worked, snippets of conversations with Rook played in her mind. His gruff voice, softened only when speaking of his fellow ravens, echoed in her ears. We protect our own, he had said. No matter what. Ellie paused, her brow furrowing. But at what cost? She wondered aloud. And where's the line between loyalty and blind obedience? She stood up, stretching her tense muscles, and walked to the window. The city sprawled before her, a maze of lights and shadows. Somewhere out there, the ravens were riding, their engines a distant rumble in the night. I have to find a way in deeper, Ellie mused, her reflection determined in the glass. But I can't lose myself in the process. This story, it could make my career. But it has to be honest, raw, real. She turned back to her laptop, resolve steeling her spine. I'll navigate their world, she declared to the empty room. But on my terms. As a journalist. As Ellie Finch. Not as some wannabe raven. Her fingers flew over the keys once more, weaving together the threads of loyalty, danger, and the allure of Rook's world. With each word, Ellie felt herself balancing on the knife's edge between ambition and integrity, determined to tell a story that would resonate far beyond the borders of the Shadow Raven's territory. Ellie's phone buzzed, startling her from her intense focus. Maris's name flashed on the screen, and a wave of warmth washed over her. Maris, Ellie breathed, answering the call. I was just about to text you. You have impeccable timing as always. Hey, Elle, Maris's familiar voice filled the line. Just checking in. How are you holding up with all this raven business? Ellie sank onto her bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. I'm managing. It's intense, Maris, but I can't thank you enough for being here through all of this. That's what best friends are for, right? Maris chuckled softly. I might not understand everything about this world you're diving into, but I'm always here to listen. And that means more to me than you know, Ellie said, her voice thick with emotion. I don't think I could do this without you as my anchor. There was a pause, filled with the weight of unspoken understanding between them. Ellie's mind flashed to countless late-night study sessions, shared dreams, and the unwavering support Maris had always offered. Just be careful, okay? Maris finally said. I know this story is important to you, but you're more important to me. Ellie nodded, even though Maris couldn't see her. I promise. I'll be careful. As they said their goodbyes, Ellie's chest tightened with a mix of gratitude and determination. She ended the call, her phone suddenly feeling heavy in her hand. Standing up, she walked to her desk, fingers trailing over her notes about the Shadow Ravens. Rook's intense gaze seemed to stare back at her from a hastily sketched portrait. What am I getting myself into? She whispered, a shiver running down her spine. But even as apprehension coiled in her stomach, a thrill of excitement coursed through her veins. Ellie took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. Time to dive deeper, she murmured, reaching for her jacket. The night was calling, and with it, the promise of uncharted territory in both her career and her heart. Chapter 7. The burner phone buzzed against Ellie's hip, startling her from a fitful sleep. She fumbled for it in the darkness, squinting at the harsh glow of the screen. An unknown number. Her heart quickened as she swiped to read the message. Iron Vipers spotted at the abandoned foundry on Blackthorn Road. Big shipment coming in tonight. Ellie sat up, suddenly wide awake. The Iron Vipers venturing into Raven territory? This could be the break she'd been waiting for. Her mind raced with possibilities as she threw off the covers and padded to her makeshift desk. Flicking on the lamp, she grabbed her notebook and scrawled down the tip, her pen flying across the page. The abandoned foundry. She knew the place. It had been a hub of illegal activity for years before being shuttered. If the Iron Vipers were using it now, it could mean serious trouble for the Ravens. Ellie chewed her lip, weighing her options. This was too big to ignore, but she needed more than an anonymous tip to go on. She reached for her regular phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Come on, pick up, she muttered as the phone rang. On the fourth ring, a gruff voice answered. Do you have any idea what time it is, Finch? Sorry, Brick, Ellie said, trying to keep the excitement from her voice. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. I need your help. There was a long pause, then a heavy sigh. What kind of trouble are you stirring up now? Ellie smiled despite herself. The kind that could blow this whole territory dispute wide open. I've got a tip about the Iron Vipers moving in on Raven turf. Tonight? Shit, Brick muttered. Where? The old foundry on Blackthorn. I need you to tell me if you've heard anything about this. Any chatter, any rumors, anything at all. As Brick mulled it over, Ellie's mind whirled with possibilities. If this was true, it could be the story that finally launched her career. But more than that, it could give her the leverage she needed with the Ravens. With Rook. Look, Brick said finally. I can't confirm anything, but there's been talk. Whispers about the Vipers making a big move soon. If they're at the foundry, it's not good, Ellie. You need to be careful. Ellie's pulse quickened. I will be. Thanks, Brick. I owe you one. As she hung up, Ellie felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. This was it, the lead she'd been waiting for. But with it came a pang of worry. If the Vipers were encroaching on Raven territory, it could mean all-out war between the clubs. And where did that leave her? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. She needed more information, and she knew just where to get it. Grabbing her jacket, Ellie headed for the door. The night was young and she had work to do. The neon sign of the Lucky 8 diner flickered intermittently, casting an eerie glow across the nearly empty parking lot. Ellie's fingers drummed nervously on the steering wheel as she scanned the area, her hazel eyes alert for any sign of trouble. This wasn't her usual haunt, but that was precisely why her informant had chosen it. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of her car, the cool night air sending a shiver down her spine. As she approached the diner, Ellie's mind raced with questions. Who was this mysterious informant? Could they be trusted? The weight of her hidden voice recorder pressed against her ribs, a constant reminder of the risks she was taking. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, the scent of stale coffee and greasy food assaulting her senses. A lone waitress looked up, then returned to wiping down the counter. Ellie slid into a booth in the far corner, her back to the wall, giving her a clear view of the entrance. Minutes ticked by, each one amplifying her anxiety. Then finally, the bell chimed again. A man in a worn leather jacket entered, his eyes darting around before settling on Ellie. He approached her table with a slight limp. You Finch? He asked gruffly, sliding into the seat across from her. Ellie nodded, her throat suddenly dry. And you're... Doesn't matter who I am, he cut her off. What matters is what I know. Ellie leaned forward, her voice low. Tell me about the Iron Vipers. What are they planning? The informant's eyes narrowed. You sure you want to know, girl? This ain't some puff piece. People die over this kind of information. A chill ran down Ellie's spine, but she steeled herself. This was her chance, her big break. She couldn't back down now. I'm sure, she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Tell me everything. Ellie's heart raced as she crouched behind a rusted dumpster, her eyes fixed on the dilapidated warehouse across the street. The informant's words echoed in her mind, fueling her determination. This was it. The Iron Vipers' rumored hideout. The air hung heavy with the stench of motor oil and decay. Ellie wrinkled her nose, her senses on high alert. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. 2 hours of surveillance, and still nothing. Just as doubt began to creep in, a low rumble broke the silence. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as 3 motorcycles rounded the corner, their riders clad in leather adorned with the unmistakable Iron Viper's insignia. Come on, give me something, Ellie whispered, her finger hovering over her camera's shutter button. The bikers dismounted, their movements purposeful. One of them, a towering man with a shaved head, hefted a large duffel bag off his bike. The others followed suit, each carrying similar bags. Ellie's pulse quickened. Weapons? Drugs? She mused internally, her journalistic instincts kicking into overdrive. As the group approached the warehouse, Ellie's finger pressed down, capturing a rapid succession of photos. The soft clicks of her camera seemed deafening in the quiet alley. One of the bikers paused, turning his head slightly. Ellie froze, pressing herself against the dumpster, praying she hadn't been spotted. Yo, Spike! a gruff voice called out. You coming or what? The moment passed, and the biker continued on. Ellie released a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she lowered her camera. This is it, she thought, a mix of excitement and fear coursing through her veins. The informant was right, but what are they planning, and how deep does this go? As the warehouse door clanged shut behind the iron vipers, Ellie knew one thing for certain. Her investigation had just taken a dangerous turn, and there was no going back now. Ellie's heart raced as she surveyed the warehouse's perimeter, her keen eyes searching for any potential entry points. The rusted fire escape on the building's far side caught her attention, its ladder tantalizingly out of reach. That's my way in, she murmured, her mind already formulating a plan. Crouching low, Ellie darted from shadow to shadow, her footsteps nearly silent on the cracked pavement. As she neared the fire escape, she spotted a stack of discarded pallets nearby. Perfect, she thought, a small smile tugging at her lips. With careful movements, Ellie dragged the pallets beneath the fire escape, wincing at every scrape against the ground. Once in position, she clambered up, her fingers grasping the cold metal of the lowest rung. As she pulled herself up, a distant dog's bark made her freeze. Easy, Ellie, she coached herself. You've got this, just like that time in Marseille. Reaching the second-floor landing, Ellie peered through a grimy window. The warehouse's interior was dimly lit, but she could make out several figures moving about. Jackpot, she whispered, her camera already in hand. So Ellie angled herself to capture clear shots through the dirty glass, her finger working the shutter with practiced precision. Each click felt like a small victory. Suddenly, a voice from inside made her pause. Hey, did you hear something? Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself flat against the wall, willing her heart to quiet its frantic beating. Probably just rats, another voice replied. This place is crawling with them. As the footsteps moved away, Ellie let out a shaky breath. Too close, she thought, her mind racing. But I need more. I need to know what's in those bags. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone, activating its video function. One quick peek inside, she promised herself. Then I'm out of here. Ellie inched closer to the window, her phone held steady as she recorded. 2 Iron Vipers members came into view, their voices carrying through the thin glass. So, we're really going through with this attack on the Ravens? One asked, his tone a mix of excitement and apprehension. Ellie's eyes widened, her grip on the phone tightening. Her heart raced as she leaned in, straining to catch every word. The other man nodded, a sinister grin spreading across his face. Tomorrow night, we hit 'em hard and fast. They won't know what hit 'em. Jesus, Ellie thought, her mind reeling. This is bigger than I imagined. Rook needs to know. A sudden creak beneath her feet made Ellie freeze. The rusted metal of the fire escape groaned under her shifted weight. Inside, the conversation halted abruptly. What was that? One of the vipers growled. Panic surged through Ellie's veins. Time to go, she whispered, her journalistic instincts warring with her survival instinct. As footsteps approached the window, Ellie scrambled down the fire escape, her movements frantic but calculated. She hit the ground running, her breath coming in short gasps. Hey, there's someone out there! A voice shouted from above. Ellie's legs pumped harder, her mind focused on one thought. Get to safety. Get to Rook. She darted between shadows, her heart pounding in her ears. The sound of pursuit faded as she weaved through back alleys, her intimate knowledge of the area proving invaluable. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ellie reached her temporary base. She burst through the door, slamming it behind her and sliding down to the floor, gasping for air. Holy shit, she panted, clutching her phone and camera to her chest. I've got to warn them. This changes everything. Ellie's hands trembled as she pushed open the heavy wooden door to the Shadow Raven's clubhouse. The familiar scent of leather, motor oil, and stale beer hit her nostrils, but tonight it felt ominous rather than comforting. Her eyes scanned the dimly lit room, settling on Rook's imposing figure at the far end. Rook, she called out, her voice carrying an urgency that immediately caught his attention. We need to talk. Now. Rook's piercing gaze locked onto her, his brow furrowing at her disheveled appearance. "What's going on, Ellie?" he asked, his deep voice tinged with concern. Ellie strode towards him, her heart still racing from her earlier escape. "The Iron Vipers," she said, her voice low but intense. "They're planning an attack on your compound. I've got proof." A hush fell over the clubhouse as nearby ravens turned to listen. Rook's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Show me," he demanded. Ellie pulled out her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she pulled up the photos and recordings. "I infiltrated their warehouse," she explained, handing the device to Rook. "They're stockpiling weapons, planning to hit you hard and fast." As Rook examined the evidence, Ellie couldn't help but notice the tension radiating from his broad shoulders. She wondered if he was angry at her for taking such a risk, or grateful for the information. Maybe both. "This is serious shit, Ellie," Rook growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You could have gotten yourself killed." Ellie swallowed hard, fighting the urge to shrink under his intense gaze. "I know," she admitted, "but this was too important to ignore. Your lives are at stake here." Rook ran a hand through his hair, a rare display of vulnerability that made Ellie's heart clench. He turned to address the gathered ravens. "Listen up," he commanded. "We've got a situation on our hands." As Rook briefed his men, Ellie's mind raced. She'd known the stakes were high when she started this investigation, but now, surrounded by these people she'd grown to care about, the reality of the danger hit her full force. This wasn't just a story anymore. These were lives at risk. Rook's life at risk. "We need a plan," Rook declared, his authoritative voice snapping Ellie back to the present. "And we need it fast." Ellie's heart raced as she listened to the ravens discuss their options. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily on her, but beneath the fear, a fierce determination bloomed. She couldn't stand idly by while Rook and his people faced this threat. "I want to help," Ellie interjected, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their scrutiny. Rook's piercing gaze locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. "This isn't your fight, Ellie," he said, his tone softer than she expected. "You've done enough already." Ellie shook her head, taking a step forward. "No, it is my fight now. I'm in this too deep to walk away." She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I have contacts, resources. I can gather more information, maybe even find out their exact plan of attack." Rook's jaw clenched, and Ellie could almost see the internal struggle playing out behind his eyes. She pressed on, "Let me help, Rook, please." A tense silence fell over the room. Ellie held her breath, acutely aware of the potential danger she was volunteering for. But the thought of leaving Rook and the ravens to face this alone was unbearable. Finally, Rook spoke. "All right," he conceded, his voice gruff. "But you play it safe, you hear me? No more sneaking into warehouses." Relief flooded through Ellie, mingled with a surge of adrenaline. "I promise," she said, meaning it. "I'll be careful." As the meeting continued, plans being made and tasks assigned, Ellie couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. She'd entered this world as an outsider, seeking a story. Now she was part of something bigger, something that mattered more than any headline ever could. Chapter 8. Zane Fletcher's jaw tightened as he spotted the Shadow Ravens patch on the leather vest of the man across the dingy bar. The flickering neon cast an eerie glow on the rival's face, illuminating a cocky smirk that made Zane's blood boil. He pushed off from the sticky bar top, his long strides eating up the distance between them. Well, looks like a little raven's flown too far from the nest," Zane drawled, his voice low and menacing. He loomed over the seated man, using his height to full advantage. The Shadow Raven tensed, his hand inching towards his waistband. "I ain't looking for trouble, Viper." Zane's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Funny, 'cause trouble's been looking for you." He leaned in closer, the scent of cheap whiskey and fear mingling in the air between them. "How's your fearless leader these days? Still think he's untouchable?" The man's eyes narrowed. "Rook's twice the man you'll ever be, Fletcher." A muscle ticked in Zane's jaw at the mention of Rook's name. Images flashed through his mind. A burning clubhouse, the pungent smell of smoke, screams echoing in the night. He pushed the memories aside, focusing on the present. Is that so? Zane's voice dripped with sarcasm. Tell me, does he still wear that ridiculous ring? The one he claims belonged to his old man? The Shadow Raven's confusion was evident. How do you? Zane cut him off with a harsh laugh. Oh, I know more than you think about your precious Rook. Things that would make your skin crawl. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Things that'll bring him to his knees before I'm done. The man lunged to his feet, fists clenched. You don't know shit, Fletcher. Zane's hand shot out, gripping the man's throat with lightning speed. He slammed him against the wall, ignoring the startled gasps from nearby patrons. I know everything, Zane hissed, his face inches from the choking man. And soon, so will everyone else. Your precious Rook's gonna learn what it's like to lose everything he cares about. Just like I did. He released his grip, watching with satisfaction as the man slumped to the floor, gasping for air. Zane straightened, adjusting his leather jacket with practiced nonchalance. Run along now, little bird, he sneered. Fly back to your nest and tell Rook the storm's coming. And this time, there's nowhere to hide. As Zane strode out of the bar, the weight of his revenge settled comfortably on his shoulders. Soon, he thought, soon Rook would pay for everything he'd done, and Zane would savor every moment of his downfall. Zane strode into the Iron Viper's clubhouse, the sharp smell of cigarette smoke and motor oil assaulting his senses. His eyes scanned the dimly lit room, taking in the tense postures of his fellow gang members. Perfect, he thought. The seeds of discord were already taking root. Boys, he drawled, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. Looks like we've got ourselves a little situation. Heads turned, conversations halted. Zane reveled in the uneasy silence that followed. What kind of situation, Zane? Spike, a burly man with a scarred face, asked warily. Zane's lips curled into a predatory smile. Seems our friends at the Shadow Ravens have been getting a bit too comfortable on our turf. And you know what happens when birds get too cocky, don't you? He paused, letting the implications sink in. The air crackled with tension as he paced the room, his boots echoing on the worn floorboards. They fall, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Hard. A younger member, still sporting a fresh tattoo, shifted nervously. But Zane, we've got that truce. In an instant, Zane was in front of him, looming over the stammering kid. A truce? He spat. Is that what you call it when they're muscling in on our deals, stealing our clients? The young man's eyes widened in fear, and Zane felt a surge of satisfaction. He turned to address the room at large. The Shadow Ravens think they can play us for fools, but we're going to show them just how wrong they are. His voice dripped with venom. It's time we reminded them who really runs this town. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Zane could feel the energy in the room shifting, anger and anticipation replacing the earlier unease. What's the plan, boss? Spike asked, his meaty hands clenching into fists. Zane's mind raced, piecing together the perfect strategy. We hit them where it hurts, he said slowly, savoring each word. Their reputation, their business, their precious little family? He locked eyes with each member, daring them to challenge him. None did. By the time we're done, Zane concluded, his voice cold and determined, the Shadow Ravens will be nothing but a memory. And Rook? His lips twisted into a cruel smile. Rook will wish he'd never crossed paths with me. As the room erupted into enthusiastic planning, Zane allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, very soon, he would have his revenge. Zane retreated to his private office, the din of excited voices fading behind him. He settled into the worn leather chair, pulling out a well-thumbed notebook from his desk drawer. The pages were filled with meticulous notes, sketches, and timelines, a testament to months of obsessive planning. Time to set things in motion, he muttered, flipping to a fresh page. His pen scratched across the paper, detailing the next phase of his plan. Zane's brow furrowed in concentration as he plotted out each precise step, anticipating potential obstacles and crafting contingencies. "Can't leave anything to chance," he growled, tapping the pen against his teeth. "Not when it comes to Rook." As he worked, memories of past humiliations at Rook's hands flickered through his mind. The sting of rejection, the mocking laughter, the burning shame. It all fueled his determination. Zane's hand trembled slightly, and he paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He caught a glimpse of his reflection in the grimy office window, haunted eyes staring back at him from a face etched with lines of bitterness. "You're pathetic," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Still letting him get to you after all these years." For a moment, the mask of ruthless confidence slipped, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. Zane's shoulders sagged, the weight of his obsession pressing down on him. "Why can't I just let it go?" he asked the empty room, his voice cracking. But as quickly as it appeared, the moment of weakness passed. Zane's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening once more. "No," he snarled, gripping the pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. "I've come too far to back down now. Rook and his precious shadow ravens are going down, no matter what it takes." With renewed determination, Zane bent over his notebook, pouring all his pain and anger into the intricate web of revenge he was weaving. The dingy backroom of the Iron Viper's clubhouse buzzed with tension as Zane paced, his lanky frame casting a long shadow across the grimy floor. The smell of stale beer and cigarettes hung in the air, mingling with the metallic scent of motor oil that seemed to permeate every surface. "All right, listen up," Zane barked, his sharp gaze sweeping over the assembled group of bikers. "Plans have changed. The Shadow Ravens are making a move tonight, and we need to be ready." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the room. Zane's lip curled in a sneer as he observed the uncertainty on their faces. Pathetic, he thought, but useful. "Got a problem with that, Diesel?" Zane's voice dripped with venom as he addressed a burly man leaning against the wall. Diesel shifted uncomfortably. "It's just... we ain't prepared for a full-on confrontation, Zane. Maybe we should..." In two swift strides, Zane was in Diesel's face, his eyes blazing. "Maybe you should shut your mouth before I shut it for you," he hissed. "I didn't ask for your opinion. I'm telling you what's going to happen." Zane's mind raced, adapting his carefully laid plans to this new development. He could use this, turn it to his advantage. His lips curved into a cruel smile as the pieces fell into place. "Here's what we're going to do," he announced, turning back to address the group. "We're going to meet the Ravens head-on, but not where they're expecting. I've got inside information on their route. We'll ambush them at the old quarry." As Zane outlined his strategy, he could see the doubt in their eyes slowly giving way to grudging admiration. They might fear him, but they couldn't deny his tactical brilliance. "Any questions?" Zane asked, his tone making it clear that there had better not be. Silence reigned. Zane nodded, satisfaction coursing through him. "Good. Now get moving. We've got a war to win." As the others filed out, Zane allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. This was it, the culmination of years of planning and waiting. He could almost taste the sweet flavor of revenge on his tongue. "You ready for this, Zane?" A voice called from the doorway. It was Viper, the club's old president, his weathered face creased with concern. Zane's mask slipped seamlessly back into place. "Born ready?" he replied with a cocky grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Those Shadow Ravens won't know what hit them." As he strode out into the night, Zane's mind was already 10 steps ahead, plotting and scheming. The confrontation loomed, and he was determined to come out on top, no matter the cost. The roar of motorcycles filled the air as Zane led the Iron Vipers through the winding roads to the old quarry. His heart raced with anticipation, adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. As they approached the ambush point, Zane signaled for silence. The engines cut out, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. He could hear his own heartbeat, steady and strong, as he waited for the telltale rumble of the Shadow Ravens. "Remember," Zane hissed to his crew. We hit them hard and fast. No mercy. The sound of approaching bikes reached their ears, growing louder with each passing second. Zane's lips curled into a cruel smile. Now! He shouted, gunning his engine and leading the charge. The Iron Vipers burst from their hiding spots, catching the Shadow Ravens completely off guard. Chaos erupted as bikes collided and fists flew. Zane's eyes scanned the melee, searching for one face in particular. There. Rook. Zane maneuvered his bike through the fray, laser-focused on his target. As he drew closer, he saw the moment recognition dawned in Rook's eyes. Long time no see, old friend, Zane sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Rook's face hardened. Zane, should have known you'd be behind this. Oh, I'm behind so much more than you realize, Zane replied, circling Rook like a shark. Your whole world's about to come crashing down, and I'll be there to watch you burn. As the two men squared off, Zane felt a surge of savage joy. Everything was falling into place, just as he'd planned. The Shadow Ravens were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, and their precious leader was right where Zane wanted him. You always were too arrogant for your own good, Rook, Zane taunted. Never saw the knife coming until it was in your back. Zane stood atop a small hill overlooking the carnage, his lean frame silhouetted against the setting sun. The smell of burning rubber and gasoline filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. He inhaled deeply, savoring the chaos he'd orchestrated. Beautiful, isn't it? Zane murmured to himself, a twisted smile playing on his lips. His eyes scanned the wreckage below, drinking in the sight of battered bikes and bloodied bodies. The Shadow Ravens were in disarray, their once proud members now scattered and broken. A burly Iron Viper approached, his face streaked with grime and sweat. Boss, we've rounded up the survivors. What do you want us to do with them? Zane's gaze remained fixed on the scene before him. Let them go, he said, his voice low and measured. I want them to crawl back to their precious clubhouse and savor exactly what happened here. The man hesitated. But sir, shouldn't we finish the job? Zane's head snapped around, his eyes flashing dangerously. Are you questioning my orders? No, of course not, the man stammered, taking a step back. Good, Zane sneered. Because this is just the beginning. I want Rook to feel the full weight of what's coming next. As the Iron Viper hurried away, Zane turned his attention back to the devastation below. His mind running all possible scenarios, each more ruthless than the last. A plan was forming, one that would strike at the very heart of the Shadow Ravens. Oh, Rook, Zane whispered, his voice barely audible above the groans of the wounded. You have no idea what's waiting for you. And that pretty little journalist of yours? She's going to be the key to your undoing. With a final, satisfied smirk, Zane turned and strode towards his bike. The real game was just beginning, and he couldn't wait to make his next move. Chapter 9. The dim light of Rook's room cast long shadows across the worn leather and polished chrome of his prized possessions. Ellie's heart thundered in her chest as she found herself mere inches from the towering figure of the Shadow Raven's leader. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, a silent communication that spoke volumes in the charged air between them. Ellie's mind raced, her journalistic instincts battling against the undeniable pull she felt towards Ronan. She wet her lips, acutely aware of his proximity. I shouldn't be here, she thought, even as her body betrayed her, leaning imperceptibly closer. Rook's calloused hand reached out, hovering just above her arm. Ellie, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine. I can't keep pretending there's nothing between us. She inhaled sharply, the scent of leather filling her senses. Ronan, Ellie began, her voice wavering. She steeled herself, determined to maintain some semblance of professional detachment. We come from different worlds. Whatever this is, it complicates everything. His eyes softened, a vulnerability she'd never seen before shining through. I know it ain't simple, Rook admitted, his fingers finally making contact with her skin. But darlin', you've gotten under my skin in a way no one ever has. Ellie's resolve crumbled, her carefully constructed walls falling away. I feel it too, she whispered, her hand tentatively reaching up to trace the lines of his jaw. God help me, but I can't deny it anymore. Rook's arm snaked around her waist, pulling her flush against his broad chest. Then don't, he breathed, his lips hovering tantalizingly close to hers. We'll figure it out, Ellie. As their bodies drew closer, like magnets finally giving in to an irresistible force, Ellie's mind flashed to the potential consequences. Her career, her independence, the story she came here to write, all hung in the balance. But in this moment, with Rook's warmth enveloping her, none of it seemed to matter. The rustle of leather filled the air as Rook's hands roamed Ellie's back, his touch igniting sparks along her spine. Ellie's fingers tangled in his hair, her body pressed against his solid frame. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in a cocoon of shared desire. Ellie, Rook murmured, his voice husky with need. She met his gaze, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the battle between desire and the weight of his responsibilities. It mirrored her own internal struggle. Ellie whispered, her heart racing, I want you. With a low growl, Rook closed the final distance between them. His lips captured hers in a searing kiss that sent shockwaves through Ellie's body. She responded with equal fervor, pouring months of pent-up longing into the embrace. As they kissed, Ellie's mind whirled. This was so far from the detached observation she'd initially planned. She was crossing a line, becoming intimately involved with her subject. But as Rook's tongue teased hers, those concerns melted away. All that mattered was this moment, this connection. Their bodies moved in perfect sync, a dance of passion and newfound intimacy. Rook's hands explored her curves with reverence, while Ellie traced the hard planes of his muscles. Each touch, each caress, felt like a revelation. God, you're beautiful. Rook breathed against her neck, placing heated kisses along her skin. Ellie arched into him, lost in sensation. Ronan, she gasped, using his given name. It felt significant, intimate in a way that went beyond the physical. As they lost themselves in each other, Ellie knew there was no going back. Whatever came next, her world had irrevocably changed, and for once, she was ready to embrace the unknown. Ellie's fingers tangled in Rook's hair as he trailed kisses down her throat. Her skin tingled with every touch, every caress igniting a fire within her. Time seemed to slow, each moment stretching into eternity as they explored each other with tender urgency. I've wanted this from the first day I saw you, Rook murmured against her collarbone, his voice husky with desire. Ellie's breath hitched. Me too, she admitted, surprising herself with the depth of her feelings. Her journalistic instincts urged her to analyze, to question. But for once, she silenced that voice. Their movements became more urgent, clothes falling away as they gave in to their passion. Ellie marveled at the contrast between Rook's rough hands and his gentle touch. He treated her like something precious, yet his eyes burned with an intensity that made her weak at the knees. As the heat between them built, Ellie felt herself surrendering completely to the moment. Her usual sharp focus dissolved, replaced by a haze of sensations. She gasped as Rook's lips found a particularly sensitive spot. Ronan, she breathed, her nails raking down his back. I know, baby, he responded, his voice thick with emotion. I've got you. In that moment, Ellie let go of all her inhibitions. She was no longer the ambitious journalist, the detached observer. She was simply a woman in the arms of the man she'd fallen for, despite her best intentions. The room filled with the sound of their ragged breaths and whispered declarations as they clung to each other, bodies entwined. Ellie's heart raced, overwhelmed by the profound connection she felt with Rook. Ellie, Rook murmured, his voice raw with emotion. You're everything. She traced the lines of his face, committing every detail to memory. I never expected this, she confessed softly. You've turned my world upside down, Ronan. His arms tightened around her. Good, he said with a hint of his usual swagger, because there's no going back now. Ellie chuckled, the sound vibrating through both their bodies. She marveled at how natural this felt, how right. Her mind, usually buzzing with story ideas and deadlines, was blissfully quiet. What are you thinking? Rook asked, his fingers drawing lazy patterns on her skin. She took a moment to gather her thoughts. I'm thinking about how complicated this makes everything, she admitted. But also how I don't care. Rook's expression softened. I know I'm not an easy man to love, Ellie. The club, my past. It's a lot. And I'm not exactly uncomplicated myself, she reminded him. My career, my need for independence. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. We'll figure it out, he promised. Together. Ellie's breath caught as Rook's calloused fingers traced along her collarbone, leaving a trail of goosebumps in their wake. She shivered, nestling closer to his warmth. Cold? He murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice. She shook her head, her hair rustling against the pillow. Just sensitive, she admitted, feeling a blush creep up her cheeks. Rook's eyes darkened, and he leaned in to press a gentle kiss to her shoulder. I like sensitive, he whispered against her skin. Ellie's mind whirled, torn between the physical sensations and the weight of their situation. Rook, she began, her voice hesitant. What are we going to do? He pulled back slightly, his piercing gaze meeting hers. About what, specifically? He asked, his tone careful. She sighed, running a hand through her tousled hair. About everything. The club, my job, the fact that our worlds are so different. Rook was quiet for a moment, his fingers still tracing patterns on her skin. We take it one day at a time, he finally said. I'm not giving you up, Ellie. We'll face whatever comes our way. Even if it means risking everything? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His expression softened, a rare vulnerability shining in his eyes. You're worth the risk, he said simply. Before Ellie could respond, a soft knock at the door broke the moment. Rook tensed, his arm instinctively tightening around her. It's Inara, a familiar voice called from the other side. Can I come in? Ellie's heart raced, her mind frantically assessing their state of undress. Rook, however, seemed unfazed. Yeah, come on in, he called back, his voice steady. The door creaked open and Inara stepped inside, her long black braids swinging behind her. Her sharp eyes took in the scene before her, a knowing smile playing at her lips. Well, she said, leaning against the doorframe, I see you two have finally stopped dancing around each other. Ellie felt her cheeks burn, but Rook's chuckle rumbled through his chest. That obvious, huh? He asked, a hint of pride in his voice. Inara's expression softened as she looked at Ellie. You okay, hun? She asked gently. Ellie nodded, finding her voice. We're good, she said, surprised by the conviction in her own words. Just trying to figure out where we go from here. Inara stepped further into the room, her presence both comforting and commanding. You know the club's got your back, right? She said, her gaze moving between Rook and Ellie. Whatever comes, the Shadow Ravens stand together. Ellie felt a lump form in her throat, overwhelmed by the acceptance. Even me? She asked quietly. Especially you, Inara affirmed, her voice warm. You're family now, Ellie, whether you like it or not. Rook's arm tightened around Ellie once more, and she could feel the tension leaving his body. She realized then how much her acceptance meant to him, to all of them. As Inara turned to leave, Ellie caught Rook's gaze. No words were needed. Their eyes conveyed everything. In that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, they made a silent vow. To stand strong, to protect what they had found, to never let go. The road ahead might be rough, but they were ready to ride it out, side by side. Chapter 10. Ellie's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the windowsill, her eyes darting between the clock on the wall and the empty street below. The anticipation coiled in her stomach, a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that set her nerves buzzing. She tucked a wayward strand of hair behind her ear, leaning closer to the glass as if it might make Rook materialize sooner. "Come on," she murmured, her breath fogging the pain. "Where are you?" As if summoned by her whispered words, a low rumble echoed in the distance. Ellie's heart leapt, her journalistic instincts kicking in as she strained to confirm the sound. Yes, there it was again. The unmistakable growl of a motorcycle engine. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, hazel eyes widening as Rook's sleek black bike rounded the corner. Even from this distance, his presence commanded attention, the power of the machine beneath him an extension of his own strength. Ellie's mind raced, already crafting the narrative of this moment. The leader of the Shadow Ravens, she thought, a man as mysterious as the club he governs. But as she watched Rook park and dismount with fluid grace, she realized her usual objectivity was slipping. This wasn't just a story anymore. Rook's gaze found her at the window, and even from here, she could see the subtle shift in his expression. The hard lines of his face softened, those piercing eyes warming as they took in her obvious excitement. A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips, barely visible beneath his beard but unmistakable to Ellie. "You coming down, or am I talking to you through the glass all day?" Rook called up, his deep voice carrying easily. Ellie laughed, already moving away from the window. "Give me 2 seconds," she shouted back, grabbing her jacket and bag. As she hurried down the stairs, Ellie's mind whirled. What was this surprise? Why did it make her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with getting a scoop? She paused at the door, taking a deep breath to center herself. "Get it together, Finch," she muttered. "You're a professional." But as she stepped outside and saw Rook waiting, all thoughts of professionalism momentarily fled. He stood there, leather-clad and imposing, yet the look in his eyes as they met hers spoke of something softer, something that made Ellie's carefully constructed walls waver. "Hey," she said, aiming for casual and missing by a mile. "Hey yourself," Rook replied, his gruff tone belied by the warmth in his gaze. "Ready for that surprise?" Ellie nodded, her curiosity battling with a deeper, more complicated emotion. "Lead the way, Mr. Mysterious," she quipped, falling back on humor to mask her inner turmoil. As Rook turned to his bike, Ellie couldn't help but wonder, was she really ready for whatever this day might bring? Rook reached into the saddlebag of his motorcycle, pulling out a sleek black helmet. His eyes crinkled with amusement as he held it out to Ellie. "Safety first," he said, a playful smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. "We're going for a ride?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement and a hint of nervousness. "That's the plan," Rook nodded, his deep voice sending a shiver down her spine. "Unless you've got cold feet?" Ellie squared her shoulders, her journalistic instincts kicking in. This was a chance to see Rook's world up close, to understand the man behind the motorcycle club leader. "Not a chance," she said, taking the helmet from him. As she adjusted the strap, Ellie's fingers trembled slightly. Was it anticipation or something more? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. Rook swung his leg over the bike, the machine rumbling to life beneath him. He looked back at Ellie, his gaze intense. "Hop on," he said, patting the seat behind him. Ellie took a deep breath, steeling herself. This was it. She climbed onto the bike, the leather seat warm beneath her. As she wrapped her arms around Rook's waist, she was acutely aware of the solid strength of his body. "Hold on tight," Rook instructed, his voice low and close. As they pulled away from the curb, Ellie's grip tightened instinctively. The wind whipped around them, and she felt a surge of exhilaration course through her veins. They sped out of the city, buildings giving way to open countryside. The scent of wildflowers filled the air, mingling with the leather of Rook's jacket and the hint of motor oil. Ellie breathed deeply, letting the sensations wash over her. The sun warmed her skin as they rode, its rays painting the landscape in vibrant hues. Ellie found herself mesmerized by the play of light on Rook's broad shoulders, the way it glinted off his helmet. This is more than just a story, Ellie thought, her heart racing in time with the motorcycle's engine. But what exactly is it? As they cruised along a winding country road, Rook's voice carried over the wind. So, city girl, ever been on a bike before? Ellie laughed, the sound bubbling up from deep within her. Does a Vespa count? Rook's shoulders shook with silent laughter. Not even close. This is the real deal. I can tell, Ellie replied, her voice tinged with excitement. It's exhilarating. They rounded a curve, and Ellie instinctively leaned into Rook, her body moving in sync with his. The closeness sent a shiver down her spine. You're a natural, Rook called back, approval evident in his tone. Ellie grinned, a warmth spreading through her chest. I had a good teacher. Oh, yeah? Rook's voice held a hint of playfulness. And what else can this teacher show you? Ellie's mind raced, inner feelings kicking in. How about the story of how you got into motorcycles? Rook was quiet for a moment, and Ellie worried she'd overstepped. But then he spoke, his voice softer than before. It's a long story, but I guess we've got time. As Rook began to share, Ellie found herself hanging on every word. Her curiosity piqued not just by the story, but by the man himself. She realized, with a mix of excitement and trepidation, that she was falling for more than just the thrill of the ride. The roar of the motorcycle engine softened as Rook slowed, guiding them onto a winding country road. The change in pace seemed to mirror the shift in his demeanor, his shoulders tightening almost imperceptibly. Growing up in Eastside wasn't exactly a picnic, Rook began, his voice low and gravelly. My old man split when I was 5, left Mom to fend for herself with 3 kids. Ellie's heart clenched. She tightened her grip around his waist, a silent gesture of support. We didn't have much, but Mom. She was something else. Worked 2 jobs, still made it to every school event. A hint of pride crept into Rook's voice. But the neighborhood, it was rough. Gangs everywhere, always looking to recruit. As he spoke, Ellie found herself leaning in closer, straining to catch every word over the wind. Her journalist's mind was racing, piecing together the story of the man behind the tough exterior. I was 14 when I saw my first motorcycle rally, Rook continued. These guys, they weren't like the gangs. They had a code, you know? Brotherhood, loyalty. It was... He paused, searching for the right word. Intoxicating. Ellie nodded, her cheek pressed against his leather jacket. She could feel the rumble of his voice through his back, the vulnerability in his words touching something deep within her. Joined the Shadow Ravens as soon as I could. Found a family there, a purpose. Rook's voice softened further. It saved me, Ellie. Gave me something to fight for besides just survival. As he fell silent, Ellie's mind whirled with questions, empathy, and a growing admiration for Rook's resilience. She wanted to say something, to convey her understanding, but words felt inadequate. Instead, she gave him a gentle squeeze, hoping her actions could speak where her voice failed. The motorcycle purred beneath them as they wound through the countryside, the rhythm of the engine and the rush of wind creating a cocoon of silence around Rook and Ellie. Fields of golden wheat stretched out on either side, swaying gently in the breeze, their undulating motion mirroring the rise and fall of Ellie's chest as she held tightly to Rook. In this moment of quiet, Ellie felt the weight of Rook's confession settling between them. The vulnerability he'd shown, the trust he'd placed in her, it all seemed to hang in the air, unspoken, but palpable. She pressed her cheek against his back, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his leather jacket, and marveled at how naturally they fit together. As the miles rolled by, Ellie's thoughts drifted inward. She reflected on her own journey, the twists and turns that had led her to this moment. The struggling journalist, always chasing the next big story, now found herself caught up in a narrative more compelling than any she'd ever written. Who would have thought, she mused silently, that my search for a scoop would lead me here? Rook's presence in her life had shifted something fundamental. His strength, his loyalty, the depth of his character. It all challenged her preconceptions about the world she'd been trying to expose. He's changed me? Ellie realized, her heart quickening at the thought. Not just my story, but me. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. As a journalist, she'd always prided herself on her objectivity, her ability to remain detached. But with Rook, those walls were crumbling. Is this what it feels like? She wondered. To fall for someone you're supposed to be investigating? The conflict between her professional ambitions and her growing feelings for Rook gnawed at her. Yet, as they rode on, the warmth of his body against hers, Ellie found herself caring less about the story and more about the man behind it. Ellie's hand trembled slightly as she reached into her bag, fingers brushing against the familiar leather of her notebook. With a deep breath, she pulled it out along with her favorite pen, its weight comforting in her grip. "Everything okay back there?" Rook called over his shoulder, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Perfect," Ellie replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "Just need to jot something down." As Rook guided the motorcycle along the winding road, Ellie balanced the notebook on his broad back, using it as a makeshift desk. Her pen hovered over the blank page for a moment, before the words began to flow. "Rook," she wrote, her handwriting a bit shaky from the vibration of the bike. "I never expected this journey to lead me here to you. You've shown me a world I never truly understood. And in doing so, you've changed me." Ellie poured her heart onto the page, her words a mix of journalistic precision and raw emotion. She wrote of her admiration for his strength, her respect for his loyalty, and the unexpected depth of her feelings for him. "I know our worlds are different," she continued, "but I can't deny what's growing between us. You've become more than just a story to me, Rook. You're someone I believe in. Someone I—" She paused, the pen poised above the paper. The word love danced on the edge of her thoughts, both thrilling and terrifying. "Someone I can't imagine my life without," she finally wrote, feeling the truth of it in her bones. As she finished the letter, Ellie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Whatever happened next, she knew she had to be honest, with Rook and with herself. "Hey," she called out, tapping Rook's shoulder. "Can we stop for a minute? There's something I want you to read." The motorcycle slowed down, its powerful rumble quieting as Rook guided it to the side of the winding country road. Ellie's heart raced, a mix of anticipation and nervousness coursing through her veins as she dismounted, her legs slightly wobbly from the long ride. Rook turned to her, his piercing gaze softening as he took in her expression. "Everything all right, Ellie?" She nodded, fishing the folded letter from her pocket. I wrote you something. Could you read it?" As Rook's eyes scanned the page, Ellie studied his face, searching for any reaction. His brow furrowed slightly, then relaxed, his eyes widening as he absorbed her words. When he looked up, there was a vulnerability in his gaze that she'd never seen before. "Ellie, he began, his voice husky with emotion. She held her breath, waiting for his response. Instead of speaking, Rook closed the distance between them, pulling her into a fierce embrace. Ellie melted into him, inhaling the scent of leather and motor oil that had become so comforting to her. When they finally parted, Rook's eyes were shining. "I'm not good with words like you are," he said softly. "But I feel it too. All of it." Ellie's heart soared. "Really?" He nodded, a rare, unguarded smile spreading across his face. "Really, you've become everything to me, Ellie. I never thought I'd find someone who could understand both sides of me, the leader and the man." As they climbed back onto the motorcycle, Ellie felt a newfound sense of belonging. The road stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew they'd face them together. "Ready?" Rook called over his shoulder. "Always," Ellie replied, tightening her arms around his waist. As they roared down the highway, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues, Ellie's mind spinning with thoughts of the future. There were still so many unknowns, her career, the club, the dangers that came with Rook's world. But for now, She allowed herself to simply enjoy the moment, secure in the knowledge that their connection had deepened into something real and lasting. The wind whipped through her hair, carrying with it the scent of possibility. Ellie smiled, eager to see where this unexpected journey would take them next. Chapter 11. The rumble of a motorcycle engine shattered the quiet afternoon at the Shadow Ravens compound. Leander Hughes cut the ignition, his keen eyes sweeping across the weathered buildings and gravel lot. His gaze lingered on each face, each window, searching for a glimpse of familiar brown hair or hazel eyes. Ellie's heart thudded against her ribs as she peered through the dusty garage window. What the hell is he doing here? Her fingers trembled as she tucked a wayward strand of hair behind her ear. Breathe, she commanded herself. You've got this. Everything okay, Elle? Rook's deep voice startled her. She plastered on a smile, turning to face him. Yeah, just unexpected visitor. Rook's brow furrowed as he glanced outside. You know that guy? Sort of. Ellie hedged, her mind racing. How much should I tell him? He's a source for a story I'm working on. Leander's boots crunched on the gravel as he approached the garage. Ellie's pulse quickened. She could practically feel his piercing gaze searching for her. Want me to get rid of him? Rook offered, his protective instincts flaring. No. Ellie winced at her too quick response. I mean, it's fine. I should talk to him. Thanks, though. She squeezed Rook's arm, drawing strength from his solid presence before stepping outside. The sun's harsh glare made her squint as she walked towards Leander, every step an internal battle between her journalistic instincts and her growing loyalty to the Ravens. Leander, she called, fighting to keep her voice steady. This is unexpected. His eyes locked onto hers, searching. Ellie, fancy meeting you here. The tension crackled between them like static electricity. Ellie's mind raced, formulating and discarding explanations. She'd known this moment might come, but she'd hoped for more time to prepare. I could say the same to you, she replied, injecting a hint of challenge into her tone. What brings you to this neck of the woods? Leander's lip quirked in a humorless smile. Oh, you know, just following up on some leads. Interesting place you found yourself in? Ellie's heart hammered. Does he know? How much does he suspect? She forced herself to maintain eye contact, refusing to be the first to look away. It's a fascinating subculture, she said, falling back on her professional persona. The bonds of loyalty, the traditions. There's a lot more to motorclub life than most people realize. Leander nodded slowly, his gaze never wavering. I'm sure there is. Lots of hidden depths, I imagine. The double meaning in his words sent a chill down Ellie's spine. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the garage door creaked open behind her. Everything all right out here? Rook's voice carried a hint of steel beneath its casual tone. Ellie turned, caught between two worlds, her carefully constructed narrative threatening to unravel. As Rook's steady presence anchored her, she made a split-second decision. Rook, this is Leander. He's an old acquaintance. Leander, meet Rook. He's been showing me the ropes around here. The two men sized each other up, an unspoken current of tension flowing between them. Ellie held her breath, praying that the fragile balance she'd struck wouldn't come crashing down around her. Leander's eyes narrowed, his gaze flicking between Ellie and Rook. Showing you the ropes, huh? That's awfully generous of him. I'm curious, Ellie, just how deep does this research of yours go? Ellie felt her palms grow clammy. She wiped them surreptitiously on her jeans, buying a moment to compose her thoughts. It's a complex story, Leander. The Shadow Ravens aren't just a motor club, they're a community. I'm here to understand that. To give them a fair shake in the media. She watched Leander's jaw tighten, could almost see the gears turning in his mind. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. And what about your relationship with Rook? Is that part of your research too? The accusation in his tone made Ellie's cheeks flush with anger and embarrassment. She fought to keep her voice steady. My personal life isn't relevant to the story, Leander. You know that. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they rang hollow. Her relationship with Rook had become inextricably tangled with her investigation, blurring lines she'd once thought were clear. Leander's eyes darted back to Ellie's face. She could see the wheels turning, knew he was piecing together far more than she'd intended to reveal. But she held her ground, meeting his gaze with a mix of defiance and carefully calculated openness. "Careful, Ellie," Leander said finally, his voice soft but laden with meaning. "Sometimes the story we set out to tell isn't the one we end up living." As he spoke, Ellie felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Had she managed to deflect Leander's suspicions, and at what cost? And how long could she keep walking this tightrope between two worlds? Leander's piercing gaze lingered on Ellie, his jaw tightening as he sensed the unspoken truths hanging in the air. "You're holding back, Ellie," he said, his voice low and insistent. "I've known you long enough to see when you're deflecting." Ellie's heart raced, her palms growing clammy. She fought to maintain her composure, but felt her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "I'm not hiding anything, Leander," she insisted, her voice wavering slightly. "I'm just trying to maintain journalistic integrity." "Integrity?" Leander scoffed, taking a step closer. "Or are you protecting someone?" The question hit Ellie like a punch to the gut. Images of Rook flashed through her mind, his rare, genuine smile, the warmth of his embrace, the fierce loyalty in his eyes. She swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. "I'm protecting my sources," Ellie countered, but even to her own ears, the words sounded weak. Leander's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Or are you in too deep, Ellie? Have you crossed a line you can't come back from?" The weight of his words crashed over her, and Ellie felt her world tilting on its axis. She'd always prided herself on her objectivity, on her ability to remain detached from her stories. But now, standing in the Shadow Raven's compound, with the scent of leather and motor oil lingering in the air, she realized just how far she'd strayed from that ideal. Her career, her reputation, her very identity as a journalist. All of it hung in the balance. And looming larger than all of that was Rook, and the unexpected, powerful connection they'd forged. Ellie began, her voice faltering. She took a deep breath, struggling to find the right words. "It's complicated, Leander. More than you know." The heavy thud of boots on concrete interrupted Ellie's thoughts. She turned, her heart skipping a beat as Rook strode into view, his imposing figure filling the doorway. His eyes, sharp and alert, took in the scene before him, lingering on Ellie's face before settling on Leander with laser-like focus. "Everything all right here?" Rook's deep voice rumbled through the room as he moved to stand beside Ellie. His presence was like a shield, radiating strength and protection. Ellie felt a mix of relief and apprehension wash over her. "Rook, But Leander cut her off, his stance shifting to face Rook directly. "Well, if it isn't the Shadow Raven's second-in-command, perfect timing. I've got some questions for you, Maddox." Rook's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the intricate tattoo on his neck. "That so?" he replied, his tone deceptively calm. "And who might you be?" Leander pulled out his badge, flashing it briefly. "Detective Hugas. I'm investigating some irregularities involving your club." Ellie's mind raced. She could feel the tension crackling between the two men, like storm clouds gathering before a tempest. Leander's eyes narrowed as he continued. "Your loyalty to the Shadow Ravens is well known, Maddox, but I'm wondering where your true allegiances lie, especially when it comes to Ms. Finch here." Rook's hand found the small of Ellie's back, a subtle gesture of support that sent warmth spreading through her body. "My loyalty," Rook growled, "is to my brothers and to the truth. Something I'm not sure you're familiar with, Detective." Ellie's breath caught in her throat. She knew Rook was protective, but challenging a police officer so openly was dangerous. She wanted to intervene, to defuse the situation, but the words stuck in her throat as she watched the confrontation unfold. Ellie's heart pounded as she stood between Leander and Rook, the weight of her next words pressing down on her like a physical force. She could feel the heat radiating from Rook's body, his presence both comforting and terrifying in its intensity. Leander's eyes bore into her, demanding answers she wasn't sure she could give. Ellie began, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. This isn't what you think, Leander. Rook's hand tightened on her waist, a silent reminder of his support. She glanced up at him, seeing the fierce determination in his eyes. The Shadow Ravens are more than just a club, Rook said, his deep voice resonating through the room. We're a family. We look out for each other, stand by each other. That includes Ellie. Leander scoffed. A family of criminals, you mean? Ellie felt a surge of anger at his dismissive tone. You don't understand, she said, her voice stronger now. These people have values, a code they live by. It's not as simple as you're making it out to be. Rook nodded, his eyes never leaving Leander's face. Loyalty, honor, brotherhood. These aren't just words to us, detective. They're a way of life. Ellie's mind raced, knowing her next words could change everything. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what was to come. Leander's gaze shifted between Ellie and Rook, his brow furrowed. For a moment, his hard expression softened, revealing a flicker of uncertainty. Ellie seized the opportunity. Tell me, Leander, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. How far are you willing to go for your job? How many lives are you prepared to destroy? Leander's jaw clenched. I'm doing what's necessary to protect innocent people. Are you? Ellie challenged, taking a step forward. Rook's hand slipped from her waist, but she could feel his unwavering presence behind her. Or are you so focused on bringing down the Shadow Ravens that you've lost sight of the bigger picture? Leander's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? I'm saying that maybe your black and white view of the world isn't as clear-cut as you think, Ellie retorted. She gestured around the room. These people have families, dreams, hopes. They're not just faceless criminals. As she spoke, Ellie noticed a subtle shift in Leander's demeanor. His eyes darted between her and Rook, a look of dawning realization crossing his features. You're in too deep, Ellie, Leander said, his voice softer now. Can't you see that? Ellie felt a pang in her chest. Was she in too deep? She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the matter at hand. Maybe I am, she admitted. But that doesn't change the fact that what you're doing is ethically questionable at best. How many lives have you infiltrated? How many relationships have you built on lies? Leander's eyes flashed with anger, but Ellie could see the flicker of doubt behind them. She pressed on, her heart pounding in her chest. You came here looking for the truth, Leander. But are you ready to face it yourself? The room crackled with tension. Ellie could feel Rook's steady breathing behind her, a silent pillar of support. Leander's gaze darted between them, his mind visibly working to piece together the puzzle before him. What exactly are you saying, Ellie? Leander's voice was low, dangerous. Ellie took a deep breath, knowing her next words could change everything. I'm saying that maybe it's time for you to question your own motives. Are you really serving justice, or are you just chasing a personal vendetta? Leander's hand twitched towards his hip, where Ellie knew he kept his concealed weapon. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it hard to breathe. You don't know what you're talking about, Leander growled. Don't I? Ellie countered, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. I've seen both sides now, Leander, and I'm telling you, it's not as simple as you think. For a moment, Ellie thought Leander might lunge at her, but then something unexpected happened. His shoulders sagged, just slightly, and a look of weariness crossed his face. You're right about one thing, Ellie, he said quietly. This isn't simple. And with that, Leander turned on his heel and strode towards the door. Just before exiting, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. This isn't over, he said, his eyes locking with Ellie's. Make your choice carefully, because next time we meet, there won't be any middle ground. As the door slammed shut behind him, Ellie felt the weight of his words settle over her. She turned to Rook, her mind reeling with the implications of what had just happened. What now? She whispered, suddenly unsure of everything. Rook's expression was unreadable as he reached for her hand. Now, he said softly, we have a war to prepare for. Chapter 12. The flickering fluorescent light cast an eerie glow on Rook's face as he leaned against the grimy concrete wall, his piercing gaze fixed on Ellie. She inhaled deeply, the musty air of the storage room filling her lungs, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. I've got something, Rook, Ellie began, her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled a thick manila folder from her bag, the weight of its contents a testament to her tireless investigation. It's about Zane and the Iron Vipers. His importance is much higher than we thought. Rook's eyebrow arched, a flicker of interest crossing his rugged features. Show me, he commanded, his gravelly voice resonating in the confined space. Ellie spread the documents across a rickety table, her fingers trembling slightly as she arranged the evidence. Photos of clandestine meetings, financial records, and intercepted communications formed a damning mosaic of Zane's duplicity. Look here, she pointed to a grainy surveillance photo. This is Zane meeting with the Iron Viper's weapons supplier. And these bank statements? They show a pattern of large cash deposits coinciding with recent attacks on our territory. Rook leaned in, his muscular frame casting a shadow over the table. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the evidence, the gears in his mind clearly turning. Ellie watched him intently, her heart racing with a mix of anticipation and fear. God, I hope this is enough, she thought. We need to act fast before Zane makes his next move. There's more, Ellie continued, her voice gaining strength. I've traced communications between Zane and several Iron Viper's lieutenants. They're planning something big, Rook. Something that could destroy the Shadow Ravens for good. Rook's jaw clenched, a vein pulsing at his temple. How sure are you about this, Ellie? He asked, his tone measured but tinged with urgency. Ellie met his gaze unflinchingly. I stake my life on it, she replied, her conviction unwavering. We need to expose Zane's role in this escalation. It's the only way to stop this before it spirals out of control. Rook nodded slowly, his fingers drumming a restless rhythm on the table. You've done good work, Ellie, he said, a hint of admiration coloring his words. But exposing Zane won't be easy. He's got friends in high places. Ellie's mind raced, considering their limited options. We might not have a choice, she argued, her journalistic instincts kicking into high gear. If we don't act now, Leander's investigation could give Zane the upper hand. We need to control the narrative. The tension in the room was palpable as Rook contemplated their next move. Ellie held her breath, acutely aware of the weight of this moment. Their future, and the future of the Shadow Ravens, hung in the balance. Rook's piercing gaze softened as he looked at Ellie, his eyes reflecting a mix of determination and vulnerability. You're right, he said, his voice low and gravelly. We can't let Zane and his goons destroy everything we've built. I'll be damned if I let him tear apart my club. Or what we have. Ellie's heart skipped a beat at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. She pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. So, what's our play? She asked, leaning forward. Rook's lips curled into a predatory smile. We use your evidence to turn the tables on that snake, he growled. Hit him where it hurts. His reputation, his connections. We expose him for the backstabbing rat he is. Ellie nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. It's a good start, she said. But we need to think bigger. This isn't just about Zane anymore. It's about neutralizing the entire threat from the Iron Vipers. She stood up, pacing the small room as she outlined her plan. I propose a two-pronged approach, Ellie explained, her hands gesticulating as she spoke. First, we gather more concrete evidence against Zane. We need irrefutable proof of his involvement in escalating this conflict. Rook listened intently, his eyes following her movements. And the second prong? He asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. Ellie stopped pacing, turning to face him with fire in her eyes. We devise a strategic plan to confront the Iron Vipers head-on, she said firmly. We need to neutralize their threat once and for all. Rook's eyes narrowed, a mixture of admiration and concern flickering across his rugged features. He stood, closing the distance between them with 2 long strides. "I like your thinking, Ellie," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But this ain't some puff piece you're chasing. We're dealing with dangerous men who won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens their operation." Ellie felt a shiver run down her spine, but she held his gaze defiantly. "I'm aware of the risks, Rook. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't prepared to face them." He nodded, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "All right then. I'll assign some of my most trusted ravens to assist you. Panther, Hawk, and Cloud. They're the best we've got for gathering intel without raising suspicions." Ellie's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was about to dive headfirst into the dangerous world of motorcycle clubs, and there was no turning back now. Rook's expression turned grave as he continued. "But listen carefully, Ellie. This isn't just about gathering evidence. You need to watch your back every second. There could be informants or spies anywhere, even within our own ranks. Trust no one except the team I've assigned you and me. Understood?" Ellie swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling on her shoulders. "Understood," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As if on cue, 3 imposing figures entered the room: Panther, Hawk, and Cloud. Ellie studied their faces, committing each to memory. These would be her lifelines in the dangerous waters she was about to navigate. "Let's get to work," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "We need to document every suspicious move Zane makes, every shady interaction. Leave no stone unturned." As the group huddled together, discussing strategies and dividing tasks, Ellie couldn't help but wonder if she was in over her head. But one look at Rook's determined face was enough to steel her resolve. She had a job to do, and she was going to see it through, no matter the cost. The Shadow Raven's compound buzzed with a tense energy as Rook barked orders, his deep voice echoing off the concrete walls. Ellie watched from the sidelines, her heart racing as she witnessed the club's preparations unfold. "Reinforce those gates," Rook commanded, pointing to the compound's entrance. "I want them impenetrable, and double the patrols along the perimeter." Ellie's gaze followed Rook as he moved with purpose, his tattooed arms flexing as he helped lift heavy metal sheets. She couldn't help but admire his leadership, the way his men responded to his every word without hesitation. "We're not just defending," Rook announced, his eyes blazing with determination. "We're sending a message. The Iron Vipers think they can intimidate us? They've got another thing coming." As Rook continued to orchestrate the fortification, Ellie's phone vibrated in her pocket. She slipped away, finding a quiet corner to check the message. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the cryptic text from one of her sources. "City Hall, back entrance, 30 minutes. Zane's there." Ellie's mind raced. This could be the break they needed. She glanced at Rook, engrossed in his preparations, and made a split-second decision. Without a word, she slipped out of the compound, her pulse pounding in her ears. 30 minutes later, Ellie crouched behind a dumpster near City Hall's back entrance, her camera at the ready. The acrid smell of garbage made her wrinkle her nose, but she remained focused. Suddenly, a sleek black car pulled up. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as she recognized Zane stepping out, his lanky frame unmistakable. But it was the man who emerged next that made her blood run cold, Councilman Davis, known for his tough-on-crime stance. As Ellie snapped photos, her mind whirled. Zane's reach extended far beyond the streets. With a corrupt official in his pocket, the Iron Viper's threat had just become exponentially more dangerous. "Oh, Rook," Ellie whispered to herself, her voice trembling. "We're in deeper trouble than we thought." Ellie's hands shook as she slipped back into the Shadow Raven's compound, her mind reeling from what she'd witnessed. She found Rook in his office, hunched over a map of the city, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Rook," she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." He looked up, his piercing gaze softening as it met hers. "What is it, Ellie? What did you find?" Ellie closed the door behind her and approached his desk, her fingers drumming nervously against her thigh. It's worse than we thought. Zane, it's not just the Iron Vipers. There are connections in City Hall. Rook's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his beard. How high up? Councilman Davis, Ellie replied, pulling out her camera to show him the photos. I caught them meeting behind City Hall. This goes beyond just club rivalries, Rook. We're dealing with systemic corruption. As Rook examined the photos, Ellie watched his expression darken. She could almost see the gears turning in his head, reevaluating their entire strategy. Damn, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. This changes everything. Ellie nodded, her heart racing. We can't just take on Zane and the Iron Vipers. We need to expose the whole network. Rook's eyes met hers, a mix of determination and concern swirling in their depths. It's dangerous, Ellie. Are you sure you want to get involved this deep? She squared her shoulders, lifting her chin defiantly. I'm already in this, Rook. All the way. A ghost of a smile played on his lips, pride in something else, something warmer, flickering in his eyes. All right then. What's our next move? Ellie took a deep breath, her fingers hovering over her phone. I have a contact at the Riverdale Gazette, Sarah Chen. She's tenacious, trustworthy, and has a nose for corruption stories. If we give her what we've got, she'll run with it. Rook nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. Do it, but be careful. We can't risk this getting back to Zane or Davis before we're ready. With trembling fingers, Ellie dialed Sarah's number. The phone rang twice before a sharp, eager voice answered. Chen speaking. Sarah, it's Ellie. I've got something big. Bigger than anything I've brought you before. There was a pause on the other end. I'm listening. Ellie's eyes met Rook's as she spoke, drawing strength from his steady gaze. Corruption at City Hall, ties to a notorious motorcycle club, and evidence that could blow it all wide open. But we need to move fast. Sarah's voice crackled with excitement. Send me what you've got. I'll start fact-checking immediately. As Ellie ended the call, Rook leaned forward, his tattooed arms resting on the desk. Now comes the hard part. We need to plan our move against the Iron Vipers. Ellie's mind raced, piecing together their strategy. The media exposure will weaken Zane's position, but we need to be ready to strike when it hits. Rook nodded, his expression grim. We'll gather the Ravens, shore up our defenses. When the story breaks, we'll confront Zane head-on. Show of force, but smart. We can't give him any ammunition to use against us. As they delved into the details of their plan, Ellie felt a mix of exhilaration and fear coursing through her veins. She was in deeper than she'd ever imagined. But looking at Rook, she knew there was nowhere else she'd rather be. The weight of their impending confrontation settled over the room as they finished outlining their strategy. Ellie's fingers trembled slightly as she closed her laptop, the gravity of what they were about to do finally sinking in. She looked up to find Rook watching her, his piercing gaze softened by a flicker of concern. You okay? He asked, his usually gruff voice tinged with gentleness. Ellie took a shaky breath. I'm scared, she admitted, her journalistic facade crumbling. This is bigger than anything I've ever done, Rook. What if we fail? What if someone gets hurt because of the information I've uncovered? Rook moved around the desk, kneeling before her. He took her hands in his tough fingers intertwining with hers. Hey, he said softly. Look at me. She met his eyes, finding strength in their unwavering intensity. We're in this together, he continued. You and me, the Ravens. We've got each other's backs no matter what happens. Ellie nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I never thought I'd find this kind of loyalty in a story, she whispered. But it's not just a story anymore, is it? Rook shook his head, a rare smile tugging at his lips. No, it's not. You're one of us now, Ellie, and we protect our own. As he spoke, Ellie felt a surge of affection and determination. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. Whatever happens, she murmured, I'm glad I'm facing it with you. Chapter 13. Ellie's phone buzzed, the screen illuminating with an unfamiliar number. She answered, pen poised over her notepad. "Hello?" A gruff voice crackled through the speaker. "You want the real story on the Shadow Ravens? Meet me at the corner of 5th and Elm in an hour. Come alone." Ellie's mind whirred as she grabbed her jacket and headed out into the crisp night air. This could be the breakthrough she'd been waiting for, the key to unlocking the secrets of the enigmatic motorcycle club that had captured her attention and her heart. As she approached the designated corner, the streetlights cast long shadows across the empty sidewalks. A figure emerged from a nearby alley, beckoning her closer. Ellie hesitated, her journalistic instincts warring with her desire for the truth. "You the reporter?" the shadowy figure called out. Ellie nodded, taking a cautious step forward. "I'm here for information on the Shadow Ravens." "This way," the figure grunted, retreating into the alley. Ellie followed, her senses on high alert. The narrow passageway seemed to close in around her, the brick walls looming overhead. Suddenly, rough hands grabbed her from behind, a cloth pressed against her face. She struggled, but darkness quickly engulfed her. When Ellie regained consciousness, she found herself in a dimly lit room, her wrists bound behind her back. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced herself to take deep breaths, channeling the determination that had driven her career. "Think, Ellie," she muttered to herself, eyes darting around the space. "There's always a way out." She twisted her wrists, testing the strength of her bonds. The rope was tight, but not impossibly so. As she worked, Ellie's gaze swept the room, searching for anything that might aid her escape. A rusted pipe ran along the wall to her left, its edge jagged and promising. If she could maneuver herself close enough, perhaps she could use it to fray the ropes. Ellie inched her way across the floor, wincing as the rough concrete scraped her legs. "Come on," she whispered, gritting her teeth as she strained to reach the pipe. "You've faced tougher challenges than this." As she worked, Ellie's mind filled with questions. Who had set her up? What did they want? And most importantly, how would this affect her relationship with Rook and the Shadow Ravens? The sound of approaching footsteps sent a chill down her spine. Ellie redoubled her efforts, desperation fueling her movements. She had to find a way out, not just for herself, but for all the stories left untold, all the truths yet to be uncovered. The door swung open with a menacing creak, and a lanky figure sauntered in, his blonde hair falling carelessly over piercing eyes. Ellie's heart raced, but she forced her face into a mask of calm defiance. "Well, well," the man drawled, his voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't the nosy little journalist. Enjoying your accommodations?" Ellie met his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I've had better. The room service is lacking." A humorless smirk twisted his lips. "Zane Fletcher," he introduced himself with a mock bow. "Welcome to the Iron Viper's hospitality." Ellie's mind raced, recognizing the name from her research. Zane Fletcher, the cunning enforcer of the Iron Vipers. She steeled herself, knowing she'd need every ounce of her wit to navigate this encounter. "I appreciate the welcome," Ellie replied, her tone steady despite her pounding heart. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm just here for a story, nothing more." Zane circled her like a predator, his eyes glinting with malice. "Oh, you'll be part of a story, all right. Just not the one you thought you'd be writing." Ellie swallowed hard, fighting to maintain her composure. "Look, Zane," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not your enemy. Whatever you think I know, whatever you're after, we can talk about this reasonably." A harsh laugh escaped Zane's lips. Reasonable? That's rich coming from someone who's been poking her nose where it doesn't belong. Ellie's mind raced, searching for a way to turn the conversation in her favor. She couldn't let fear paralyze her now. "I'm a journalist," she stated, chin lifted defiantly. "It's my job to uncover the truth. But I'm not here to cause trouble for you or the Iron Vipers." Zane's lips curled into a cruel smirk. "Oh, but you already have, sweetheart. And now you're going to help us settle an old score." A chill ran down Ellie's spine as Zane leaned in close, his breath hot on her ear. "You see, your boyfriend Rook and his Shadow Ravens have been a thorn in our side for far too long. But now we've got something he cares about. Ellie's heart plummeted. This wasn't just about her anymore. They were going to use her against Rook, against the man she loved. Rook won't fall for your games, Ellie said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to sound confident. He's smarter than that. Zane's eyes glittered dangerously. Oh, I'm counting on it. The smarter he thinks he is, the harder he'll fall when we bring his whole world crashing down. Ellie's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. She couldn't let them hurt Rook or the Shadow Ravens. What do you want? She asked, trying to buy time. It's simple, Zane replied, circling her again. Rook's going to hand over control of his territory, or he'll never see you again. And trust me, you don't want to know what happens if he refuses. Fear clawed at Ellie's throat, but she forced it down. She had to stay strong, had to find a way to warn Rook. He won't do it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He won't sacrifice everything he's built. Zane's laugh was cold and mirthless. We'll see about that. Love makes men do stupid things, and from what I hear, Rook's got it bad for you. Ellie's mind whirled, a kaleidoscope of memories and regrets crashing over her. How had she ended up here, bound and at the mercy of a ruthless biker? Her journalistic instincts had always pushed her to chase the next big story, to uncover the truth no matter the cost. But now, as she faced the very real consequences of her choices, she wondered if she'd finally pushed too far. You don't have to do this, Zane, Ellie said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her gut. There are other ways to resolve conflicts between clubs, ways that don't involve innocent people getting hurt. Zane's lip curled into a sneer. Innocent? You stopped being innocent the moment you got mixed up with Rook and his crew. You made your choice, sweetheart. Now you get to live with it. Ellie felt a surge of defiance. And what about your choices, Zane? Is this really who you want to be? A man who threatens women to get what he wants? For a moment, something flickered in Zane's eyes, a hint of uncertainty, perhaps even shame. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold fury. You don't know anything about me or what I want, he snarled, leaning in close. This isn't about what I want. It's about what the Iron Vipers deserve. What I deserve. Ellie met his gaze, refusing to be cowed. And what's that? Power? Respect? You think taking me hostage is going to earn you either of those things? Zane's hand shot out, gripping her chin. What I think is that you need to shut your mouth before I shut it for you. As Zane's fingers dug into her skin, Ellie's determination solidified. She would find a way out of this. For herself, for Rook, and for the truth she still believed in. No matter what it took. Ellie's jaw clenched, her muscles tensing as she prepared to act. In one swift motion, she jerked her head back, breaking Zane's grip, and thrust her bound hands upward, catching him square in the chin. Damn! Zane staggered back, eyes blazing with fury. Ellie scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. She knew she had seconds before Zane recovered. Her eyes darted around the dimly lit room, searching for an escape route. Zane lunged forward, grabbing her arm. You little witch! Ellie twisted, using her momentum to slam her elbow into his solar plexus. The impact sent shockwaves of pain up her arm, but Zane's grip loosened. As she wrenched free, Ellie's mind raced. How many Iron Vipers were outside? Could she outrun them with her hands still bound? Zane's laughter cut through her thoughts, cold and mocking. Where do you think you're going to go, Ellie? You're in the heart of Viper territory now. Reality crashed over her like a wave. Even if she made it past Zane, she was surrounded by enemies. The odds were overwhelming. Ellie's breath came in short gasps. Let me go, Zane. This won't end well for anyone. Oh, it'll end just fine for me, Zane sneered, circling her like a predator. You're my ticket to bringing Rook down, and I'm not letting that go. The cold certainty in his voice sent a chill down Ellie's spine. For the first time, she fully grasped the precariousness of her situation. She was alone, outnumbered, and at the mercy of a man consumed by vengeance. Ellie's heart raced as the gravity of the situation settled over her. She swallowed hard, her journalistic instincts kicking in even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. "What's your endgame here, Zane?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "You think hurting me will bring Rook running?" Zane's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Oh, I'm counting on it. Your precious Rook has a weakness now, and I intend to exploit it." The realization hit Ellie like a punch to the gut. Their love, which had been a source of strength and comfort, was now a vulnerability that could destroy them both. She clenched her fists, determination surging through her veins. "You don't know Rook like I do," Ellie said, her hazel eyes flashing with defiance. "He won't fall for your trap." Zane leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "We'll see about that." Suddenly, the distant roar of motorcycles cut through the tension. Zane's head snapped toward the sound, a look of surprise crossing his face. "Looks like your knight in leather armor is here sooner than expected," he growled. Ellie's heart leapt. Was it really Rook? Hope and fear warred within her as the engines grew louder. Zane grabbed her arm, yanking her toward the door. "Time for you to play your part, sweetheart." As he dragged her forward, Ellie's mind raced. She had to find a way to warn Rook, to protect him from walking into this trap. But how? Chapter 14. The flickering fluorescent lights at the war room turned the faces of the Shadow Ravens into a chiaroscuro of apprehension. Rook's fingers traced the outline of the Iron Viper's stronghold on the makeshift map spread before them, his jaw clenched with the weight of the task ahead. "Listen up," Rook's gravelly voice cut through the tension-filled air. "We've got one shot at this, and Ellie's life hangs in the balance. Every move we make needs to be precise, calculated." He met the eyes of each member gathered around the table, noting the mix of steely resolve and barely concealed fear. The familiar scent of gun oil mingled with the metallic tang of adrenaline, a potent cocktail that set Rook's nerves on edge. "Thor, you'll take point on the perimeter. Inara, I want you covering our 6. The rest of you stick to the shadows and stay alert. We're not just up against the Vipers, we're racing against time." As Rook outlined the intricacies of their plan, his mind wandered to Ellie. Her determined hazel eyes and probing questions had wormed their way under his skin, past the armor he'd spent years cultivating. Now, the thought of her in danger made his chest constrict with an unfamiliar ache. "What if they've moved her?" Blade, one of the younger members, voiced the fear that had been gnawing at Rook's insides. Rook's gaze hardened. "Then we adapt. We don't leave until we find her. Understood?" A chorus of affirmative grunts echoed through the room. Rook allowed himself a moment to marvel at the loyalty of his chosen family, each member ready to lay down their life for a woman they barely knew, simply because she mattered to him. "Remember," Rook continued, his voice low and intense, "stealth is our ally. We're outnumbered, outgunned, but we've got the element of surprise. Use it wisely." As the Ravens began their final weapons check, the familiar click of safeties and rustle of leather providing a grim soundtrack, Rook found himself dwelling on Ellie's last words to him. Her fierce independence, her unwavering pursuit of truth, qualities that both frustrated and captivated him, now seemed like beacons in the darkness that lay ahead. "Rook," Thor's deep voice pulled him from his reverie. "We're ready." Nodding, Rook straightened to his full height, shoulders squared beneath the weight of leadership and the lives that depended on his decisions. "Then let's bring our girl home." As they filed out of the room, each step bringing them closer to the dangerous unknown, Rook sent up a silent prayer to whatever higher power might be listening. Not for himself, but for Ellie, the stubborn, brilliant woman who had unwittingly become the heart of their mission, and though he was loath to admit it, perhaps his own. The Shadow Ravens moved like wraiths through the night, their dark clothing melding seamlessly with the shadows. Rook led the way, his senses hyper-aware of every rustle of leaves, every shift in the wind. Behind him, he could feel the presence of his team, their collective breath held in anticipation. Inara's voice, barely above a whisper, broke the tense silence. "Rook, 2 o'clock. Guard tower." He paused, scanning the area she'd indicated. Sure enough, the faint orange glow of a cigarette betrayed the presence of a sentry. Rook's mind raced, calculating angles and risks. "Thor," he murmured. "Think you can take him out silently?" The big man nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory focus. "Like a lamb to slaughter," Thor growled, his gravelly voice carrying a hint of anticipation. As Thor melted into the darkness, Rook felt a familiar knot of anxiety in his gut. Every mission carried risks, but this one was personal. Ellie's face flashed in his mind, her fierce determination, her unwavering spirit. He couldn't fail her. "You're thinking about her again, aren't you?" Inara's knowing voice pulled him back to the present. Rook didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Inara's hand found his shoulder, a brief moment of comfort in the midst of danger. "We'll get her back," she assured him, her tone leaving no room for doubt. The sound of a muffled thud in the distance signaled Thor's success. Rook took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The Iron Viper's stronghold loomed before them, a fortress of concrete and steel that seemed to exude malevolence. "Remember," he whispered to his team, "we're here for Ellie. In and out, no unnecessary risks." As they crept forward, the weight of his pistol a comforting presence at his hip, Rook couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. For better or worse, nothing would be the same after they breached those walls. The Shadow Ravens melted into the night, their resolve as unbreakable as the bonds that held them together. Whatever awaited them inside, they would face it as one. The first guard never saw it coming. Rook's hand clamped over his mouth, muffling any alarm as Thor's massive frame materialized from the shadows, delivering a swift, precise blow that rendered the man unconscious. They lowered him silently to the ground, exchanging a wordless nod of approval. Inara's lithe form slipped past them, her fingers dancing over the keypad of a side entrance. Seconds later, the lock disengaged with a soft click. "We're in," she breathed, barely audible. As they entered the stronghold, the air grew thick with tension. Rook's heart hammered against his ribs, his senses on high alert. The corridor stretched before them, a labyrinth of twists and turns bathed in sickly fluorescent light. "Which way?" Thor whispered, his fingers twitching near his holster. Rook closed his eyes for a moment, visualizing the blueprints they'd studied. "Left," he decided, leading the way. They moved like ghosts through the hallways, their footsteps silent on the concrete floor. Every shadow seemed to conceal a potential threat, every distant sound a possible alarm. "Rook," Inara's voice was tight with concern. "We're running out of time. If we don't find Ellie soon—" He cut her off with a sharp gesture. "We'll find her," he insisted, but doubt gnawed at him. What if they were too late? What if Ellie was— A muffled cry echoed from somewhere ahead, unmistakably feminine. Ellie's voice. Rook's blood ran cold, then hot with determination. "There," he hissed, pointing towards a heavy metal door at the end of the corridor. "Get ready, this is it." As they approached, Rook's mind rushed with possibilities, strategies, and the overwhelming need to see Ellie safe. Whatever lay beyond that door, he was ready to face it. For her. Rook raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. His keen eyes scanned the corridor, noting a nearly imperceptible tripwire glinting in the dim light. "Watch your step," he murmured, gesturing towards the trap. "They're getting clever." Inara's lips curled into a grim smile. Not clever enough. With practiced ease, Rook guided the team around the obstacle, his mind already 3 steps ahead. As they approached a junction, he held up 2 fingers, then pointed left and right. Without a word, the Shadow Ravens split into 2 groups, understanding their leader's silent command. Just as they rounded the corner, a burst of gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the walls. Rook's instincts kicked in, and he dove for cover behind a stack of crates. "Thor, suppressing fire!" he shouted over the deafening noise. As Thor unleashed a barrage from his assault rifle, Rook's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan, but he'd be damned if he'd let it derail them. "Inara, smoke grenade, then we push through." The corridor filled with thick, acrid smoke, providing the cover they needed. Rook surged forward, his fists connecting with the first iron viper he encountered. The satisfying crunch of cartilage beneath his knuckles fueled his adrenaline. All around him, chaos reigned. The air was thick with gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. Rook moved with fluid precision, years of street fights and brawls honing his skills to a deadly edge. As he grappled with a particularly stubborn opponent, Rook caught sight of Thor taking on 2 vipers at once. Pride swelled in his chest, even as worry gnawed at him. Every second they spent fighting was a second lost in their search for Ellie. "Push forward!" Rook roared, his voice carrying over the din of battle. "We're not leaving without her!" The words were as much for himself as for his team. Failure wasn't an option. Not when Ellie's life hung in the balance. Not when the very heart of the Shadow Ravens was at stake. Ellie's heart pounded in her chest as the sounds of battle echoed through the Iron Viper's stronghold. She strained against the zip ties binding her wrists, wincing as they cut into her skin. The dingy room she was held in reeked of stale cigarettes and fear. Zane paced before her, his face contorted with rage. "Your little friends think they can just waltz in here and take you," he spat, his eyes wild. "They're walking into a bloodbath." Ellie lifted her chin defiantly, even as her voice quavered. "They'll come for me. The Shadow Ravens don't abandon their own." "Is that what you think you are?" Zane sneered, leaning in close. "One of them?" She could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the desperation in his eyes. For a moment, Ellie's journalistic instincts kicked in, analyzing the man before her. What drove him to such depths of hatred? A thunderous explosion rocked the building, and Ellie's heart leapt. They were close. She just had to hold on. "You don't have to do this, Zane," she said, her voice softening. "There's always another way." Zane's laugh was bitter. "You don't know anything about me, sweetheart. This ends one way, with Rook's blood on my hands." As if summoned by his name, Rook's voice boomed from beyond the door. "Zane, it's over. Let her go." Ellie's eyes widened as Zane grabbed her roughly, pressing a knife to her throat. "Come and get her, Rook," he snarled. "If you dare." The door burst open, revealing Rook and Thor, their faces grim and determined. Ellie's heart raced as she locked eyes with Rook, seeing the mix of relief and fury in his gaze. "Let her go, Zane," Rook growled, his voice low and dangerous. "This is between us." Zane's grip tightened, the knife pressing harder against Ellie's skin. She winced, feeling a trickle of warm blood. "You took everything from me, Rook," Zane spat. "Now I'm returning the favor." Thor stepped forward, his massive frame tensed for action. "You're outnumbered, Fletcher. Don't make this worse for yourself." Ellie's mind raced, searching for a way out. She caught Rook's eye, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. With a sudden burst of strength, Ellie drove her elbow into Zane's ribs. He stumbled, his grip loosening just enough for her to break free. Thor lunged forward, tackling Zane to the ground as Rook rushed to Ellie's side. "Are you okay?" Rook asked, his hands gently cupping her face. Ellie nodded, her voice shaky. "I'm fine. Just get me out of here." The room erupted into chaos as Zane and Thor grappled on the floor. Rook pushed Ellie behind him, his eyes never leaving the fight. "You should have stayed down, Zane," Rook said, his voice laced with regret and determination. "This ends now." Zane laughed maniacally, blood trickling from his split lip. "It'll never end, Rook. Not until one of us is dead." With a roar, Zane broke free from Thor's grip and charged at Rook. The two men collided in a flurry of fists and fury, years of pent-up hatred fueling every blow. Ellie watched in horror as the men fought, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to help, but knew she'd only be in the way. Instead, she scanned the room for a weapon, anything to turn the tide. "Rook, watch out!" she cried as Zane pulled a hidden knife from his boot. Rook dodged just in time, the blade slicing through air where his throat had been moments before. Thor grabbed Zane's arm, twisting it until the knife clattered to the floor. "It's over, Zane," Rook growled, pinning him against the wall. "Your reign of terror ends here." Zane's eyes darted wildly, a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. You think this is the end? You have no idea what's coming, Rook. The Iron Vipers are just the beginning. Ellie's journalistic instincts kicked in. What do you mean, Zane? Who else is involved? Rook shot her a warning glance, but Zane's lips curled into a sinister smile. Oh, you'll see soon enough, sweetheart. This little rescue mission of yours? It's lit a fuse that can't be put out. As Thor secured Zane with zip ties, Ellie's mind raced. What had they stumbled into? She caught Rook's eye, seeing her own concern mirrored there. We need to go, Rook said, his voice low and urgent. Now. They made their way out of the compound, the adrenaline of the fight giving way to exhaustion. But as they reached their bikes, Ellie's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her face paled as she read it. Rook, she whispered, her voice trembling. We got a problem. Chapter 15. Ellie winced as she sank onto the tattered leather couch, her bruised ribs protesting the movement. The faint light of Rook's apartment cast shadows across his face, accentuating the cuts and bruises that marred his rugged features. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the angry red line along his jawline. You look like hell, she murmured, a weak smile tugging at her split lip. Rook's piercing gaze softened as he caught her hand, pressing a tender kiss to her palm. You're one to talk, darlin'. His gravelly voice was laced with exhaustion and something deeper, a vulnerability she rarely glimpsed. They sat in companionable silence, the weight of the night's events settling over them like a heavy blanket. Ellie's mind whirled, replaying the chaos of the rescue mission, the screeching tires, the stinging smell of gunpowder, the raw fear that had clawed at her throat. She shuddered, and Rook instinctively pulled her closer, his strong arms enveloping her. I've got you, he murmured into her hair, his usual bravado replaced by a gentleness that made her heart ache. Ellie nestled against him, inhaling the familiar scent of leather and motor oil that clung to his skin. She felt the tension in his body, the way his muscles coiled beneath her touch. What's going on in that head of yours, Rook? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers absently tracing patterns on her arm. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost pained. I can't stop thinking about how close I came to losing you tonight. How many times I've put you in danger because of who I am, what I do. Ellie pulled back slightly, searching his face. The turmoil in his eyes was palpable, a storm of conflicting emotions she longed to soothe. Rook, No, let me finish, he interrupted, his jaw clenching. I've spent my whole life building this club, sacrificing everything for it. But tonight, when I saw you in that warehouse... He trailed off, swallowing hard. I realize there's something I'm not willing to sacrifice. Her breath caught in her throat as she processed his words, the implications sending a tremor through her body. What are you saying? Rook cupped her face in his hands, his touch achingly gentle. I'm saying that I want more, Ellie. For you, for us. I want a future that doesn't involve constantly looking over our shoulders or wondering if tonight's the night it all goes to hell. The weight of his admission hung between them, heavy with possibility and fraught with risk. Ellie's heart raced, the journalist in her warring with the depth of her feelings for the man before her. That's a big change, Rook. Are you sure you're ready for that? He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm not sure of much, darlin'. But I'm sure about you. The rest, we'll figure out together. As dawn broke over the city, forming a soft glow through the grimy windows, Ellie and Rook held onto each other, battered but unbroken. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges neither could fully anticipate. But in that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, they found a solace that transcended the pain of their injuries and the weight of their choices. Ellie's thoughts were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She pulled away slightly, her eyes searching Rook's face. But the club, your family, can you really walk away from all of that? Rook's jaw tightened, a flicker of pain crossing his features. It won't be easy, but I've got to try. For us. The gravity of his words settled in Ellie's chest, a mix of hope and fear coiling within her. She bit her lip, her reporter's instinct pushing her to probe deeper. And what about the consequences? The people you've crossed, the enemies you've made. I know the risks, Rook said, his voice low and gravelly. But staying in this life, that's a risk too. One I'm not willing to take anymore. Ellie's heart swelled with love for him, even as doubt gnawed at her. She opened her mouth to respond, but Rook suddenly straightened, a determined glint in his eye. Come with me, he said, grabbing her hand. Before she could protest, Rook was leading her out of the room and into the main area of the clubhouse. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and the lingering odor of oil. Club members lounged on worn leather sofas, their conversations dying down as Rook entered with Ellie in tow. Listen up, Rook called out, his voice carrying the authority that had made him such an effective leader. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. Ellie's pulse quickened, sensing the weight of the moment. Rook's grip on her hand tightened as he addressed his brothers. I've got something to say, he began, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Ellie. This woman here, she's changed everything for me. Ellie's breath caught in her throat as Rook's words hung in the air. The clubhouse, usually a cacophony of rough laughter and clinking bottles, was eerily silent. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes upon her, some curious, others wary. Rook's firm thumb traced circles on her palm, a small gesture of reassurance that sent shivers up her arm. His next words came out in a rush, as if he couldn't hold them back any longer. I love her, he declared, his voice rough with emotion. And I'm going to do right by her. That means leaving the life behind. All of it. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Ellie's mind reeled, her reporter's guts battling with the surge of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Love, hope, and fear warred within her chest as she struggled to process Rook's words. Rook, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Are you sure about this? He turned to face her, his piercing gaze softening as it met hers. Never been more sure of anything in my life, darlin'. The enormity of his decision crashed over Ellie like a wave. She knew the dangers, the potential consequences of standing by a man with Rook's history. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw a future she desperately wanted to believe in. Ellie started, her voice wavering. She swallowed hard, steeling herself. I want to stand by you, Rook. But I need to do it my way. Confusion flickered across Rook's face. What do you mean? Ellie's thoughts mingled, pieces falling into place as an idea took shape. A feature series, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. About the real motorclub culture. Not the sensationalized version people think they know. Excitement bubbled up within her as the concept solidified. This was her chance to make a difference, to challenge perceptions and tell a story that mattered. I can show the world who you really are, Ellie continued, her eyes shining. All of you. The brotherhood, the loyalty, the struggles. It could change everything. Rook's eyebrows furrowed, a mix of pride and concern etched on his face. That's a dangerous game, Ellie. You sure you want to play with it? Ellie nodded, her resolve strengthening. It's what I do, Rook. It's who I am, and it might be our best shot at a fresh start. As the implications of her decision settled over her, Ellie felt a surge of determination. This was her path forward, a way to reconcile her love for Rook with her passion for journalism. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. Rook's expression softened, his piercing gaze fixed on Ellie. You're something else, you know that? He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. Most people run from our world. You want to dive right in. Ellie leaned into his touch, her heart racing. I'm not most people, she said with a wry smile. No, you're not, Rook agreed, his voice low and intense. And that's why I love you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Ellie felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of affection and pride. So, she said, pulling away slightly to meet his eyes. You're okay with this? With me writing about the club? Rook ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. It's risky, he admitted. But if anyone can do it justice, it's you. Just promise me you'll be careful. Ellie nodded, her mind already whirring with possibilities. I will, and I'll need your help, your insight. This isn't just my story, Rook. It's yours too. As she spoke, Ellie reached for her notebook, her fingers itching to start writing. She flipped it open, pen poised over a blank page. Tell me, she said, her journalist instincts kicking in. What's the one thing you wish people understood about the Shadow Ravens? Rook's brow furrowed as he considered her question. The dim light of the clubhouse accentuated the lines of worry etched into his face. It's not just about the bikes or the brotherhood, he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. It's about family, about having each other's backs when the rest of the world turns its back on you. Ellie scribbled furiously, her eyes bright with interest. As she wrote, Rook paced the room, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. But I can't keep living like this, he continued, stopping to lean against the bar. The constant risk, the illegal shit. It's not sustainable. And now, with you in my life. He trailed off, his piercing gaze finding hers. Ellie's heart skipped a beat. What are you saying, Rook? He pushed off from the bar, crossing the room in 3 long strides. I'm saying I want out, Ellie. I want a future with you, a real one. No more looking over our shoulders. No more late-night runs that could land me in prison. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. But the club? They're your family. Can you really walk away? Rook's expression softened, a rare vulnerability showing through his tough exterior. I don't know, he admitted, but I've got to try a way out of it, for a future with you. As if on cue, the clubhouse door swung open, and 3 of Rook's most trusted members walked in. Ellie recognized them as Hawk, Blade, and Diesel. Rook straightened, his leader persona sliding back into place. Boys, he greeted them. We need to talk. Epilogue. The clubhouse buzzed with excitement as Ellie stood before a sea of expectant faces. Her feature series, Beneath the Leather, the hidden heart of motor club culture, had just hit the stands, and the response was overwhelming. I can't believe it, she whispered to Rook, her fingers trembling as she clutched her phone. The Times called it groundbreaking and deeply humanizing. Rook's arm tightened around her waist, his pride evident in the slight upturn of his lips. Of course they did. You saw us for who we really are. A young woman with vibrant blue hair approached, her eyes shining with admiration. Ms. Finch, your series, it's changed how I see everything. I never thought I'd relate to motor club members, but your stories, they're so real. Ellie's heart swelled. That's exactly what I hope to achieve. Thank you. As the girl walked away, Ellie overheard snippets of conversation from around the room. Did you see the online forums? Kids are debating motor club ethics like it's philosophy class. One older member chuckled. My nephew's professor is using the series in his sociology course, another added, shaking his head in disbelief. Rook leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. You did it, Ellie. You're changing minds. She turned to face him, overwhelmed by the moment. We did it, Rook. Your honesty, your willingness to let me in. That's what made this possible. His eyes, usually so guarded, softened with emotion. Ready to get out of here? Ellie nodded, suddenly craving the open road. As they made their way through the crowd, she marveled at how her life had changed. From struggling journalist to cult sensation, all because she dared to look beyond the surface. Outside, Rook's motorcycle gleamed under the streetlights. He swung his leg over, then held out his hand to her. Where to? Ellie grinned, excitement bubbling in her chest. Anywhere. Everywhere. Let's just ride. As she settled behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, Ellie felt a surge of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Rook revved the engine and they roared off into the night, leaving behind the noise of the celebration. The wind whipped through Ellie's hair, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings. You know, she shouted over the engine's rumble, I think this is just the beginning of our story. Rook's laugh, rare and genuine, mixed with the sound of the motorcycle. Darlin', he called back, with you, every day's a new chapter. And as the city lights faded behind them, Ellie realized that sometimes the most thrilling stories were the ones you lived yourself. The end.
This is an exclusive production of the Romance Fiction Club. We hope you had a good time listening. Please like and subscribe so that we can continue creating free content for you to enjoy. Check out our library for more exciting romance stories. Thank you and have a wonderful day. See you soon. Bye-bye.